Hi, I'm Will from Tested.
I'm Norm from Tested.
We are here today with Lloyd Case,
Hi.
frequent contributor to Tested, and we're going to build a PC.
It's been
Yes.
a while since we've done this, at least on camera.
Yeah.
I think maybe a year and a half. So a bunch of things about the PC industry has changed. Some things have remained the same. We're going to talk about each component, and you've brought all the parts. So
Right.
let's get right to it. And you guys can follow along at home. Or just take notes.
I mean, so the idea here is that we're going to show you the basic steps to assembling pretty much any PC. Lloyd's picked some specific hardware because this is a machine you're building for yourself.
That's right.
But yeah, I mean, some lessons are applicable to all PC building. Some is specific to this. If you want a really nice, super crazy high-end PC, this is a good way to go. But you can also take the lessons learned here and build your own PC with a more modest budget. And we'll give you some options there as well that are current for March of 2013 at least. So I guess let's start with the case.
Well, one of the things I want to do was I want to build something fairly compact. It didn't have to be tiny, but I have limited space in my office anyway.
So this is an office machine
and then
for gaming?
For gaming, yeah. It'll be for LAN parties and stuff. And then so I found this case, which I liked because sort of the overall shape, and then it's red. There are very few red cases in the world.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's matte red too,
yes,
which
right.
is very. I like the matte style.
Yes.
And I like the handles as
Yes.
well.
It doesn't reflect your face or anything like that.
It's the Prodigy, the
Bitphoenix Prodigy.
Prodigy comes in red and orange,
And white and black.
and white and black. Now you
And are
chose.
they all matte? I'm sorry.
I think the white one, I think even the white one's matte, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
You chose a case. This is smaller than cases we've built before, like
Right.
an ATX case.
We usually use mid-towers.
This accepts a mini ITX motherboard. So the motherboard itself, as we'll see shortly, is only going to have one PCI Express slot.
And it's literally like 5 inches by 5 inches,
Roughly,
right?
yeah,
Very short.
very small. We'll see it. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to do was I wanted to be some goals. I want to be high-end gaming rig. So we're going to put high-end components as we actually build this. As we go along, though, I'll talk about options for a more cost-reduced version that still will perform pretty well.
Okay.
And then the other goal was to be fairly quiet. A couple of the things I did I'm going to talk about ahead of time because I'm not going to show installing it. One of the things I did, the Bitphoenix ships with a fairly decent fan for the front to cool the hard drives. I replaced that with, Norm, if you pull the fan, it's under the SSD over there. I got a 900 RPM fan made by Scythe. S-Flux, yeah, you can show. This is a different version, but it's basically the same brand. It's much quieter.
And it's what, 10 or 15 bucks? I mean, fans aren't particularly expensive.
Yeah, 10 or 50 bucks. So again, to reduce the noise a little bit.
And that just goes right in front of here. On
Yes,
the
it goes on the inside there.
So one of the things I've found over the years is that typically, especially if you buy an inexpensive case, and this isn't a terribly expensive case.
No, it's about $90.
Yeah. A lot of times they'll scrimp a little bit on fans, and it's a really easy thing to upgrade. You usually just have to take some components out, click them back into place, or maybe screw it into place, and you can get much quieter and probably better airflow in a lot of cases.
The other thing about this case is that even though it's a mini ITX case, it's big enough to accept one of those sealed liquid coolers, which is what I'm going to put in the CPU. Again, the goal is not to overclock the system or run it insanely high, clock frequencies, but to run it a little quieter than an air cooler would be.
Yeah. I mean, well, if you're playing games in a room with speakers and not wearing headphones, fan noise really detracts from the whole experience.
Right.
So get rid of that as much as possible. The other thing we should talk about is the power stuff is on the side here. Power front panel connectors. I kind of like that. Although that might be bad if you're plugging it right next against the wall or something like that.
If we can pop this off, actually, we're going to need to do that anyway. One of the problems, it's kind of a nice feature, but it means all your cabling is on the side, and so if you have to take the case side off, then you have to be careful not. They give you a nice long cable, so you can lay it flat while it's attached, but still you got to watch out for that.
And I mean, this is probably not the machine I would put in my living room, depending on
looks great.
I think it looks awesome, but
you need to get the
a
walnut
smaller
wood panel version.
Exactly. Something with burls.
Right.
There's a couple. Do you want to talk about the hard drive based stuff?
Now, yes, I am. You notice the hard drive base here. I'm going to take the other side off too, so we can show the whole thing on the inside. So the way Bitphoenix ships the case is with the hard drive bays so that the rails are facing the other way. So normally this hard drive bay is 180 degrees from where it is right now.
Oh, so the hard drives come in and out of this side rather than this side.
Right.
It's not that they're facing back.
Right.
Front and back. Okay.
Correct. And the problem with that is that if these rails here, if you have them on the other side, stick out so you can't put one of those big long graphics cards, because the graphics card would come and actually collide with the little rails.
Oh, so you had to take everything apart and basically do a mirror image of the optical.
And they actually give instructions in the manual how to do that. It's just a matter of you have to also reverse the optical drive tray. So it's a process that you have to remove about 25 screws, rotate it around, and screw in 28 screws. You only have to do it once, but it's still kind of annoying.
And that's only if
seems like
you're
a
using a
bummer,
really
yeah.
long graphics card, or you plan on putting a couple hard drives.
Right.
and using
Now, one of
those.
the things they do with this case that I'm not going to show too much of, there's all kinds of little mounting points for 2.5-inch really thin SSDs that you can mount them vertically.
Okay.
I'm just going to put it in one of these drive bays today.
It's just easier, right?
But yes, but you can have mount them on. There's kind of interesting. If you look in the manual again, there's interesting places to put these SSDs if you want to do that.
How many drives can you put in here total if you want to really
There
get
are
crazy?
5 drive bays.
Okay.
Was it five? Yeah, 5 2.5-inch drive bays, and then room for 3 more SSDs, I believe.
Wow. Okay, that's a
That can
more
make this
storage
heavy
than you're
system.
ever going
Right.
to need in this size machine.
Right. And so that's how the storage works. And it does accept an optical drive. I came across a mini ATX board case, a couple of them right now, that don't have actually optical drive bays anymore.
Well, they want to be really compact.
Right.
Like Silverstone has one that does fewer hard drive bays, but
Right.
still has optical drive, and yeah.
So the other thing about the mini ITX cases is typically they don't have big full-size power supplies or
Right.
the option to put that in. It seems like this is a little
Well,
bit different.
this
in
is
that.
a miniature version
show
of
this
a
over here.
full-size tower in that it even has a separate compartment for the power supply, right?
Oh wow. Okay.
So that's kind of nice. Although rather than the motherboard being mounted vertically oriented like it would in a full tower case, it's mounted horizontally, so it sits right on top of the PSU.
Okay.
That's really interesting.
So I guess let's get started building. And I think first things first.
Right.
You want to drop the PSU in, or
What I'm going to do is install. First, I'm going to install the 2 drives, the optical drive and the hard drive,
SSD.
or the SSD. Excuse me. We'll talk about those.
So, I mean, I know a lot of people when they're buying an SSD really get kind of obsessive about. Well, first off,
Performance.
optical drive's easy.
Right.
Just if you want a Blu-ray player, get a Blu-ray drive. You
Right.
went
Right.
with
The
this
Blu-ray.
Asus.
The Blu-ray. Yeah. This Asus Blu-ray. It's actually a burner, so
Okay.
you can burn Blu-rays. It's under $80 now, so
that's
the prices
fantastic.
have come down. If you want just a combo drive, let's say you just want to play Blu-ray drives, movies. You can get those for like $60 now.
Okay.
But if you're really tight on your budget, DVD drives are $18, I think.
Less than $20. Samsung has the
Right.
224.
Right.
Asus. When's the last time you burned a Blu-ray though?
I did last year. I burned a Blu-ray.
actually burned- okay.
Several of them, but
Wow.
but it
So it's
was
been
only
3
because-
months is what you're
it's-
saying.
Right. So.
The thing I would say is if you're planning on ripping a bunch of DVDs with this, go to the CD Freaks forum and find out which drives are
Right.
recommended for ripping. 'Cause
Right.
some are definitely better than others.
Again, to me, these days, optical drives are increasingly become sort of an optional component.
Yeah.
I have fewer and fewer games, for example, that come on DVD anymore. The ones that do, oddly enough, you install part of it off of DVD and it goes online and downloads the rest anyway.
Sometimes you can just take a Steam key or an Origin key, type it in, just
Right.
download the game, and forget the disc existed.
right, that's right.
So people obsess about SSDs.
Right.
There's a bunch of different controllers. They vary fairly wildly in performance and reliability and all sorts of other
Right.
stuff.
And also how people use them, whether they use it as their only drive or a complementary drive.
Yeah,
and there's
right.
hybrid drives too.
I think part of the thing is that until very recently, SSDs have been kind of an enthusiast play, and those guys obsess about everything.
Because of the
I'm
pricing.
including
Yeah,
myself.
yeah. I
in it,
mean,
right.
yeah,
They're
3%
expensive.
matters.
Right. And then, but to me, I sort of avoided using SSDs as my primary drive in a desktop system until I hit capacity I wanted.
So 256.
Wasn't enough,
Okay.
actually. Well, actually, it wasn't enough because in my primary system, like I'm running a system at home, it's got one of these we'll talk about in a minute. It's got not only a bunch of games installed, but it's got the full Adobe Suite, Microsoft Office.
Right.
So it's about half full, and that's half of 512 gig, right?
So for me, I installed Windows on the SSD, and then I did a bunch of tricks with Symlinks and stuff like that
Right.
to move all of the stuff that takes up a bunch of space but doesn't really need
Right.
performance
Well,
onto a separate hard drive.
You know, with Windows, of course, and I have a separate hard drive too in my main system, and all my photos and all that stuff. It's easy to do now with Windows 8 or even Windows 7. You just put all your default user drives on the hard drive.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so this is you went with the Crucial SSD.
And you went with one SSD only. You have no hard drive
Correct.
for the system.
That's right.
Just last year, SSDs went down under $1 per gigabyte,
Right,
which
right.
is kind of that sweet spot for SSDs. And now they're well under that.
Right. Well, I found this particular drive. This particular drive here, you can't find at this price now, but every now and then I search for it. I found this at B&H Photo
Oh,
for
this is Photo Center.
$329.
For 512 gigs.
Right.
All right.
So the M4 is not the fastest drive. Some people in particular have criticized its write performance, but if you're used to hard drives, it's going to be so much faster.
Of course, and quieter.
Right. And like I said, I use one of these in my primary system at home. It's been great. And they've been reliable. That's the other thing I think SSDs have gotten a fairly bad rap for, is that they haven't been, a lot of I won't mention any particular brands, but some have been kind of unreliable.
Well, so I mean, when I'm buying an SSD, the reliability is the thing I'm most interested in. As Patrick Norton says, if you're going from a normal hard drive to an SSD, anything you get is going to be essentially infinitely faster than what you're using right now.
Yep.
So at that point, the difference between 5 or 10% in performance is much less important than reliability.
And I
because
should
your
also-
data is really
Right, and I
valuable.
should also point out that I'm not running databases off this, right? So the small file write performance is not a big deal to me.
Yeah.
Now, even though this is, you got it for around $300, I think for the vast majority of people, they're going to want a combination
Right.
SSD and hard drive.
Right.
And I think 256 gigs is probably a right amount if you're just a casual.
Again, a lot depends on what you put on your, how much stuff you put on your drive.
Whether you want to have all of your games on the
Right,
SSD.
because there are tricks with Steam, for example. You can put a lot of your games
Yep.
on your hard drive. And things like
individual games. And I think like a 256 gig SSD, whether it's from Samsung or SanDisk,
Right.
it's around $230, $220, and then you can get a 2 terabyte Western Digital drive
Right.
for about $80.
Yeah.
Right.
So let's put these two in.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like I said, I'm not going to use one of their special mounting points. I'm just going to stick it in one of these.
Okay, so hold on,
now,
let's-
a couple of things. One other thing I'll note about this case, if you get a close-up here, you'll see this fan cable coming in.
That's kind of a weird place.
Yes, that's where it's not long enough to reach. This is a motherboard issue. It's not long enough to reach for the fan connector to the motherboard unless I run it through the drive thing. So we're going to put the drive on top of that rather than on the same platform.
And you can get some extenders for those
Yes.
for those 3.
I was just too lazy to get one.
Yeah, it's a little tricky. And this how is this guy going to go in here? Let's get this where we can see
So what we're going to do is there's just this thing has conveniently 4 holes,
Okay.
which line up with the 4
Your
holes in the back of the
rails,
drive.
okay.
Yep. Unlike a hard drive, one of the things I would point out is that if I was using a normal 3.5-inch hard drive, this is toolless. But
Oh, okay, it
because
just snaps in, okay.
yeah, it just snaps in. But I have to screw this in.
Are these the fine threads or the coarse threads? Do you remember?
It's the ones that look like the same ones you use for your DVDs. So, but
Yeah,
really
so
fine.
these guys right here. Okay. So we're looking. Let's see if we can get this shot. It's in this case, it's the finer thread. There's two different threads here. This is going to be this guy right here,
Right.
the same as an optical drive. And sometimes they have a little hat on the screw.
Right.
And really, most of these components now come with screws or they're screwless components, like you said earlier. But the only tool you really need is a screwdriver.
Right.
And you have a pretty hefty screwdriver.
Yeah. You want to show them that, Norm? Here.
Yeah.
This is a what is this? I can't remember the model number, but this is made by Milwaukee, or I should say it's sold by Milwaukee. Panasonic makes an identical model, by the way.
Oh, interesting.
Except it's black. The important thing about this is that I was leery about using electric screwdrivers in PCs until I found one with adjustable clutch, which is kind of nice because now
So it
I
doesn't
will-
over torque your screws.
I won't strip my screws.
Yeah.
Yeah, which pot metal screws in PCs are notorious.
These are not high quality screws,
Right.
as a general rule.
Right.
So and for this, I mean, with old mechanical hard drives, it's important you put all the screws in, get it really cinched down. With SSDs, there's no moving parts,
Right.
so it doesn't have to be perfect.
There's
it
no
just has to be
vibration.
close.
Yeah,
here
there's
you go,
no.
I got it.
You notice? I also there's no little. Sometimes you'll see rubber grommets for the hard drive ones. There's no. You don't need a rubber grommet with your SSD.
Yeah, there's no need for that anymore, which is nice. I mean, one of the things I liked about the SSD early on, one of the things that convinced me to move it, is both the fast boot time, but more so I got one more. There you go. More so the lack of noise, the
Right.
lack of clicking from the hard drives. Is
Although
really
it's
nice.
interesting, there was one brand of SSD. Again, it's not relevant because this is an older model, but I could actually hear high-pitched whine coming out of the drive when
Oh,
I'm
that's
working.
weird.
So,
From capacitors or something?
I'm guessing.
Okay, so then the drive just slots in. That looks really super dead simple.
Right.
And we'll plug it in, I assume, later when we have the motherboard
Yep.
in. Okay, so there's nothing more exciting than an optical drive. Is there any kind of like toolless mechanism for this, or is it just?
It is actually toolless, but you have to actually use tools to remove the front panel that actually comes installed by default. So you got to kind of go in and remove. You actually physically have to remove the hard drive bay, which is just 2 clamps.
Okay.
And it slides out, and then you have to remove a couple of screws, and then you take that out and you pop off, you unscrew the plate, and then you put it back in.
So this is if you didn't want to put an optical drive in your machine.
You leave the plate. It's a red
good
plate.
that they provide that at least.
Right. So, and then there's a little clamping mechanism. Actually, I'm thinking about this is not tool free. I'm thinking of a different case. Sorry, I need.
Conveniently, I have screws.
Yes.
4 screws.
4 screws.
I can start a couple over here if you want. It looks like, is there a cushion in here? It seems like it's pushed up a little bit.
Yes, I think you might have to.
Get it flush.
This is very hard to do with your fingers, it turns out.
They're very small
Would you
screws
like a
here.
tool?
See, I also have a magnetic. These are magnetic bits. See.
Now, people over the years have always said, hey, don't use magnetic bits, but I've always used magnetic bits and never destroyed anything. More screws?
You need, I mean, a refrigerator magnet will not erase a floppy disk, so I mean, I wouldn't worry about it.
That is a very specific reference. Forward, okay.
You need a lot stronger magnet, and since we're not even using magnetic hard drives, so it's like, it have no effect whatsoever.
Exactly.
I'm going to try real hard not to strip your optical drive screws here, Lloyd. I don't think I have the torque set right. Okay. Optical drives in, hard drives in.
Right.
Solid state drive, optical drive.
And then the other thing we're going to do is install the power supply before we set
Okay.
it aside. We've got a compartment here. What they did was, to make it easier to slide the drive in, they have a plate that you actually put onto the power supply first, and then you just slide the whole thing in.
So this is pretty common. I mean, this is not a new innovation in case design, but
So some cases, especially some of the early mini ITX cases, came with power supplies.
Yes.
This one doesn't. So you chose a 660 watt power
Right,
supply because
right.
you have one video card and you have no hard drive.
Right.
And this is ideally a low power, low
Right.
noise system.
Right.
660 watts. You don't need 750, 850.
Technically,
1,000
I
watts.
really didn't need a 660. I could probably gotten away with the Silverstone. Sorry, I said Silverstone. I meant Seasonic. Also makes a fanless 520 watt version. I probably could have gotten away with that.
But if you're putting a big video card in there, you want a good
Right.
buffer.
I just want to be sure.
Yeah.
This is a 80 plus platinum rated, so it's very low power.
is the 80 plus an efficiency?
Yes.
Or, okay.
Yes. What it means, it just means basically at idle, it's going to run at roughly 90% efficiency.
Oh, okay.
So just to give a frame of reference, with this big ass video card that we're going to put in here, and Core i7 3770K CPU, and the one drive, the thing idles about 78 watts.
Oh, and that's measured at the outlet, right?
That's measured at the outlet. That's the entire
impressive,
system.
Yeah.
Right.
So
So
this power supply also is completely modular.
yes. So in fact, before we slide it in, we're going to put in the cables.
Yeah.
So I need the
Can
big
you-
fat cable. If you look at this,
Yeah, let's show show Sam over here.
so we've got two that are labeled motherboard, which is this guy here, this big fat guy. It's got these two connectors.
And that's the 24-pin headers, basically.
Right, right. It's the big fat motherboard connector that's 24 pins on the motherboard itself. And so
It's interesting that that's two cables on one end and one on the other.
right. And then also I need the 4-pin, not the PCI Express one, but the 4-pin. It's actually 2x4 pin. That's it.
So this is the
So one of the motherboard only has one 4-pin power for the CPU. Some of them have 8.
yeah.
We're not going to overclock, so it doesn't really matter. It just runs fine.
It's interesting. This is one of the places you can get into trouble too. 'Cause some of the PCI Express, most of the, make sure you pay attention to what's labeled when you do
Right.
this. You want to plug the PSU one into the PSU because they're wired differently for
That's
the
right.
PCI Express headers than the,
That's right.
the motherboard header.
And actually, yes, especially with you can get confused in the 8-pin ones.
Yeah, if you do it backwards, it's real bad. You can catch things on fire.
But
and
actually,
destroy
they
parts.
don't. You'd have to actually force it in because the way these pins are curved is actually slightly different from one to the other.
Okay.
So I mean, I have seen people do that, but you'd have to actually use a lot of pressure to get it in.
This is one of the good rules of PC building.
Right.
Is generally
Don't force
there's
anything.
no reason to force anything
Right.
ever, except for maybe the memory.
Right.
We'll talk about that in a bit. But
And then we'll add
SATA?
one SATA, just one of them should
do
be
you need
enough.
a single head one, or are there?
There's a 4-head one here that we'll just need one of these.
Okay.
And this will have 4 SATA heads.
Yeah. So see, this will provide power to the optical drive and the
Solid state.
solid state drive.
Right.
And all of these are coded, labeled on the
Right.
on the drive.
See, this is peripheral ID SATA.
Yeah.
Also,
2
two PCI Express
PCIe.
ones. These are because the graphics card will require 2 connectors.
Wow. And you want to run two actual cables, even if the cable has.
Right.
I guess the PCIe cables never have double ends, but
No.
you
Actually,
always,
I have seen those. A couple of
Yeah,
companies do those.
Yeah.
The thing is, a lot of power supplies now are what's called single rail.
so.
So it doesn't really matter where the power comes from. It's all coming from the same source.
So instead of having two sets of
Right.
hardware inside that change.
Right. And the reason for
AC
that
to
now
DC.
is because a lot of the graphics cards requires a lot of current just to start up. Once they start up, they don't need as much current, but having that single rail helps that.
Is that why the fan spins up when you first power up your PC?
Yeah, that's one
Okay.
reason. Now, one thing about this platinum power supply is the Seasonic is it's got something called a hybrid and normal. What that actually means, this is not the power switch.
Okay.
What this means is that in hybrid mode,
Well, it's on the inside. It would be really hard to get to if it was on the
yes,
inside.
this is oriented. So this will actually eventually be oriented this way.
Okay.
But in hybrid mode, the fan won't turn unless it needs the fan.
Oh, okay.
And then in normal mode, the fan's turning all the time.
So it has a thermistor or something inside
Right.
that's measuring temperature constantly.
And you're
that's
turning
cool.
in hybrid mode.
I'm turning it on hybrid mode. Yes.
Yeah.
And then we have to put this other gizmo
What's the best? I have the plate here.
plate. I like to put the plate on first.
Okay.
Which makes it a little
Yeah,
easier.
that seems easier to me.
Okay.
I don't know what happened to all of our power supply screws, but I think they might have rolled under. We're not using the bowl effectively here, Lloyd.
Sorry.
The whole system's breaking down.
Oh no. I feel so guilty.
So now, when you're doing this, it's important to kind of look at the back of the case. And, I mean, you've built this machine before, so you know. But these plates are usually designed in such a way that they can go multiple ways.
Right.
So you could flip it over. You could have it completely the wrong way out.
Correct.
You want to make sure you have the correct side facing out and the correct orientation for the way you want your power supply to
You
be
notice
in
that I
the
didn't have
case.
the correct orientation there. Because there, we're going to make sure that so there's the screw holes. It's easy also, one thing that's can happen is that it's easy to confuse the screw holes with the little vent holes if you're not careful. I know that's from we're not quite ready yet.
on the frame.
Yeah, I'm going to line that up. Where's the screw hole?
There's
there
a screw
it is.
hole
Okay,
right
there it is.
there.
That's what I wanted. And then there's one there.
Ah,
Okay,
yeah.
there it is.
It's this edge one. Not
Okay,
the
go ahead,
corner.
Norm.
Yeah.
All right.
We're good, I think.
Let's do the edge one first.
I think you're not. Oh, there you go.
Good. Okay.
And on these, it's generally a good idea to kind of go around the circle before you start really cinching stuff down.
That will be especially good advice when we install the CPU heatsink, as you'll see shortly.
Yeah, well, and then the other thing I always tell people is that if you want to make, because you said these are pot metal, that means the metal's a little soft.
Here's where you want to actually loosen. I think you need to loosen this one over here.
Yeah. And what happens is if you don't have the screw threaded right, then you can strip the socket or the
Right.
screw. I think you're
There you go.
there you go.
Perpendicular.
Yeah, it's a good idea to do a quarter turn back until the threads click into place.
Now the other trick, of course, the other thing we need to know is that there is a screen on the bottom of this filter for air.
Okay.
It
That's because
tells you
this is
that you're
raised.
going to turn the power supply upside down so that the fan is down below.
Okay. And that is recommended.
Right. That's the way to do it.
Lloyd case approved. Okay.
When you shop for a case, you look for a case. Obviously, you like this one because it's red. A lot of cases are raised
Right.
of airflow. Is that
Yep.
something you recommend?
Yes, especially with carpets.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have a carpet and the thing sits flat on the floor, let's put it this way: if your case comes with little rubber feet, install them, because it'll make less noise and it moves around and won't scratch your wood floor if you have a wood floor. But if it's on carpet, you want it raised a little bit, otherwise the air won't flow properly.
But the other thing that I love about this case is that it does have the air filters on the intake, on the places that they're intakes.
Right.
Not all cases come with that. It's pretty standard on higher end cases these days.
Now, one thing to note about this case that's a little problematic, it's not a big deal, but you should know that this is a fairly small power supply in terms of physical size. So even then, you get a pretty severe bend in your power supply cable when you're going out.
So this is why we put the cables in before we put the power supply in the
Right, you
computer.
would never otherwise be able to get that in there.
Okay, so here let's make sure we got the shot so everybody can see. But yeah, there's only a handful of places that these will go.
And even though this is,
Oh wait, was that the?
I'm
I
not
think
sure
you
that's
think you
going.
missed.
Did I miss?
No, I don't think that's going.
Yeah, I think it's these two out here.
I think
right?
you're right. My bad. Real time, we're doing this in
Yeah,
real
this
time?
is. Well, I mean, this is the way it goes. When you're building a PC, then sometimes you notice things and you have to go back and redo, and it's okay. I mean, it's hard to mess this up. Is the thing, as long as you don't force anything.
Okay, here's where we don't screw it all the way in.
Yeah. If you don't have filters on your case, you can take a Swiffer, one of those dry Swiffers,
Oh, really?
and tape it on the outside.
I hadn't heard that. That's a great idea.
It is the most kind of hoopty way to do a filter I've ever seen, but I've done it on machines before. It works really well. It's especially important if you have cats or dogs.
Which I have a pair of dogs, so.
Well, dogs that don't shed are different. I have a dog that sheds, and
Okay, so now we've got the case more or less prepped for the motherboard. Let's
Yeah.
set up the motherboard before we put it in the case, because there's a lot of things you want to do first.
like putting CPU memory and all that
Right.
stuff in.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is applicable regardless of using a big motherboard, small motherboard,
Right.
and what type of case you're using.
Certainly, yes, this part's pretty similar.
But it's also worth mentioning we're
Oh.
getting into static.
We're going to do one more thing with the
Land.
case first,
Oh.
and that's this.
Oh yeah, this is the thing you always forget, and then have to take the whole machine apart.
That's
for.
right. This is the I/O backplate, which where for your USB ports and audio and all that stuff. Don't forget to do this.
Yeah.
Because if you do, you have to pull your motherboard back out and reinsert
Well,
this.
and if you don't put it in, it's not necessarily the end of the world, but it's probably better for airflow in the machine if you actually have this guy.
Correct. The other thing you have to do is, of course, make sure that it's going to be oriented right. Let's see the motherboard. Let's give an example of this.
Yeah.
Because it's also easy to put it up and upside down.
Or backwards. I've done that before. And if you do this wrong, it's not the end of the world. You can pop it out. Usually, you might have to take the end of your screwdriver and kind of give it a couple of whacks, but it's
So the
pretty
motherboard's going to
straightforward.
go in like that, flat,
Okay.
right? And so we make sure we get it lined up.
And it's all color coded, so it should be pretty easy to see.
So there we go.
And sometimes these are a little hard to get in.
Yeah, because this metal plate is fairly stiff. It's a lot easier than some cases.
Oh, okay.
It's those flexible backs that I've had most problems with.
So you just bend it in
Snap
and,
all the corners.
and get these.
Corners are all in.
All these little metal dots are what's going to hold it in place. So
Right.
you want to make sure you get those snapped in.
There we go.
Yep.
Now we're in.
Snapped in. All right,
Okay.
now we can put
Now we
that
can-
aside.
Set up
Excellent.
the motherboard.
Good save, Lloyd.
All right.
Okay.
Next.
Can you give
So-
me the mat?
Should we take a moment to talk about static?
Yes.
Because people always bring this up.
Yes. Don't do this at home. Well, actually, what I want to say is don't do this where it's dry and there's a lot of static electricity. We're happening not far from the bay, and it's kind of a warmish day, so there isn't a lot of static electricity. Normally at home, I have a static resistant carpet, and I work on a surface that's fairly static free. But if it's a really dry day, like sometimes you get in December around here, I'll use a static strap and ground myself.
So I'm going to tell a secret. I have built the last probably 4 machines I built for myself while sitting on a wool carpet in my living room.
Right.
Terrible.
But you're in an area where it's not extremely dry.
It's true. I do live right on the coast, and it's always really humid.
Right. Now, if you're in the Midwest in the wintertime where it's like 10 degrees below zero, and be really careful about static electricity because you can really generate a lot
Don't
of
rub your
static
beard a lot and then touch.
So the general process for protecting yourself from static is to make sure you're on something that's grounded.
Right.
This table looks like it might be grounded, but it's not. It's on
rubber feet
wheels.
yeah.
But you really want to be grounded in relation to the work surface and
Right,
you.
right.
So that's really what matters. So that means grabbing the table, grabbing your case, keeping everything in contact at all times, and you should be fine.
The other trick that helps is if you're in a very dry area, desert or wintertime where it's really cold, is to run a humidifier in your office or wherever you're working for an hour or so.
boil some water in a kettle or something.
Yeah, that helps.
Pot of boiling water next to your PC.
But really just get a grounding strap if you're all worried about
They
it.
cost $2. You get them.
And so, what surface should you be putting your motherboard on when you're putting your stuff in?
The thing that I normally use at home is I have these sheets of pink foam. You may have seen those as packing material that are anti-static, and that's generally what I use. I used to have an actual official anti-static mat that even had a place you could snap in a strap. I don't know where that is, but the pink foam works
The pink foam is what we always used at Maximum PC.
Yep.
Frequently, Gordon would put the board on top of the pink foam on top of the box that the board came in, and then put the board on top of either a bag or
I should add that chip design has been such that even memory chips, which are probably the worst culprits of static in terms of being easily damaged, have the technology developed to make them more static resistant, but you can still zap a chip if you're not careful.
So just I don't want to run this into the ground. People really worry about this. And we
Right.
get a lot of questions about it. You've been building PCs for 30 years now. I don't want to. I don't want to date you.
Let's say 20.
Okay. I was going to say I've been building PCs for 30 years. For 20 years. Sorry. How many components have you torched due to static shock at this point?
I've never killed a component due to static electricity.
Same here. Norm?
Never.
Yeah. So
0.
just be careful and it'll be fine. Okay, let's
Let's
talk
talk about
the
this
motherboard. There's a
It's
couple
tiny.
Yes, this is a mini ITX form factor motherboard.
Holy crap! It's so
baby.
small.
About 5.5 inches on the side, I think. 5 inches.
And
put
like
it in
you
my
said,
mouth.
the big differentiation between mini ATX and regular ATX is only one PCI Express line.
Right. Now, there was a standard that AMD was trying to promulgate for a while. I forget what it's called. It actually is a little bit wider. You could have 2 PCI Express slots. But
Ooh.
I have not seen that as a common format.
So if you wanted something like a small PCI X1 sound card, you couldn't put that here.
That's correct. This does have a mini PCI slot for, in this case, we have a networking
So you have Wi-Fi in
module.
there.
So Wi-Fi. This is actually WiDi capable if you want to do the wireless display thing from
Okay.
Intel.
Does that come standard with this motherboard?
This comes standard with this motherboard, and as well as 802.11n, right? So you can. I tend to connect up via wired just because of gaming and latency and all that.
And your house is wired.
But for for people that need wireless capability, it's there.
It's amazing that more desktop PCs don't come with wireless built in. I mean, something
You're
people
starting to see
don't
that
think
a little
about.
more often, but yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Is this something, but this is something you'd use for something else if you could find an appropriate sized mini PCI
Right.
Express. It's
Right.
a mini PCI Express card. I think you can
Yeah.
get SSDs that fit in there at this point,
Right.
although maybe not in that kind of small space.
No, probably not. Because most of the ones I've seen are a little bit longer than
Yeah.
that.
So this is it's made by Gigabyte, and you chose a Z77 board
Right.
because we're going Intel.
Right.
And if you're building a new Intel system right now, 1155 system,
Right.
you have Z77 and Z68.
And and H77 and H. There's a lot of variations on the point about this is a couple of things you can do with the motherboard if you care to. One is that it supports Lucid Logics, which is a way of connecting up. If you have a graphics card, let's say I have a big PCI Express graphics card, but I want to use minimal power most of the time, I could connect my monitor to one of the onboard things, use the Intel integrated graphics in fairly low power mode, just for normal desktop stuff,
Yeah.
right? And then when I fired up a game, it would switch on automatically. I can't remember the branding of the Lucid Logic software, but anyway, it's specifically designed to do that kind of stuff.
So your video, where do you plug your monitor into?
You plug your monitor into
Only here,
one of
and
these
it'll actually
ports.
transfer the video
Right,
on
right,
there.
right.
Wow.
So you don't have to switch your monitor. That's
Correct.
fantastic. I didn't know
Correct.
that they could even
That's
do
pretty
that. And then, other than that, it's just a normal motherboard, then, right?
A couple other things that Gigabyte did. They put 2 HDMI ports on here, and they were demonstrating at CES 4K monitors running off of this motherboard, if you care about that kind of stuff.
Because I'm going to build a little tiny machine and then run a 4K monitor on it, which I guess you could.
You could. The other thing it has is it has antenna ports. And there's actually antennas that come in the box if you care about that.
Dual 802.11n antennas. USB 3 on this board?
USB 3, two ports here.
Okay.
It's got a header. I want to chastise whoever designed the motherboard header. This is not a Gigabyte problem. This is a standard. But this is the USB 3 motherboard header.
It's so
Oh,
fat,
wow.
so many
It's
pins.
fat. The connector is fat. We'll see. We'll connect up later, and it's very easy to bend those pins.
Oh yeah, those are like the scariest. Those are like old,
Right,
ancient.
So
IDE
when you're
pins.
connecting up, so we're going to connect up the USB 3 connector before we slot the motherboard in.
Okay.
Or actually before we install the cooler, because once the CPU cooler is in place, the bend is horrendous.
So when you do USB 3 front panel headers, you have to have a case that has those
Right.
USB 3 front panel headers too.
And ours does. In fact, here we can show what the header looks like.
Wow, that's ridiculous. Why would they use that kind of a header at this point in time?
You know, it's not even necessarily that the header's big. It's that the rest of the connector is fat and the wires are very stiff.
Yeah.
So you got to be really careful when you not only when you insert it, but after you insert it, that you don't create these bends that actually rip the thing out.
And to compare, this is what the 2.0 header looked like
Right.
And
back in the old days.
and give some props to Bitphoenix, because if your motherboard doesn't have a USB 3 header, you can still use USB 2.
Oh, okay, that's great. Okay, so anything else about the motherboard? This is the 4-pin power
Right.
connector we talked
That's
about
for
a little
the
bit
CPU
before
power.
for the CPU.
Right. It's actually, for such a tiny motherboard, it actually has 2 fan connectors. The CPU fan, obviously,
Oh, wow.
but also a secondary one for their front case fan.
Oh, that's
that we're
good.
using.
If someone is searching for a motherboard, and you can search by brand, you can search by model, between these 68 and 77, H77, Z77, if you don't need the Wi-Fi and you don't need maybe USB 3, what would you get? This is like $130.
Everybody should get USB 3.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So a Z77.
Yes. Well, Z77, Z75, H77 is okay. It's a little. It almost doesn't. If you're not overclocking and you're not building like crazy high-end stuff, it almost doesn't matter.
So the difference is the difference
what
between Z and
happened-
H still graphics?
Yes, and one of the things that happens is that the lower down the pipeline you go, it's not that the chipset is that much less capable. I mean, it might have a couple of fewer USB ports or fewer SATA ports.
Yeah.
What it really does is that the people tend to make the motherboards more cheaply.
Oh, okay.
So you got to be careful about that aspect.
So you don't have the voltage regulators aren't as good
Right.
and stuff like that. You have less. Okay.
That's right.
And of
Now,
course,
go ahead.
the thing that matters is the chipset and also the pins.
Right.
And this is a 11
Socket 1155.
1155.
The other limitation of these small motherboards is I have 2 memory sockets. So I got to pick my memory. We're going to put 16 gig of memory in this
So
thing.
you're going to put 2 8-gig chips.
That's right.
When you're buying a motherboard and you're buying memory, you want to make sure that the memory, especially if you're doing high-end machines,
Right.
you want to make sure that the memory that you buy is on the compatibility list for the motherboard.
It helps, yeah.
I find it's just easier, so you don't have
Right.
to worry about voltage and stuff like
Right.
that. Just we plug it in and it works.
All right, let's start plugging things into this
Okay.
motherboard.
Now, the first thing we'll do is put in the CPU.
Okay, so let's talk about the CPU. You went with Intel, so this is an
That's not the
that's
CPU.
cool.
That's the CPU.
Right there.
There we go.
And you went with a high-end 3770K.
Yeah, we'll talk about a couple of options, but the 3770K is the current high end of the Ivy Bridge line.
Okay.
Right. 3.5 gigahertz base clock. It'll boost, I think, to 3.9.
So that means when you're only using one core of the
Right.
CPU, the other core speeds up.
I think up to 2, actually.
Okay.
And
But-
the K denomination,
Means that it's unlocked.
Yes.
So if I wanted to overclock, I could. Now, in reality, for this particular system, I probably would have been fine with 3770 non-K, slightly lower clock speed,
Little bit
but it would have
cheaper.
been fine. It would have been a little bit cheaper. Alternatives is, I think there's a 3350P, if I remember right. That's like a 3 gigahertz part, or 3.1 gigahertz. Perfectly fine, especially if you're just doing gaming, right? Still 4 cores. No, it's a Core i5, not i7, so
Differences in
no
cache?
hyper-threading.
Oh, okay.
Slight differences in cache, but really, again, for gaming, you probably wouldn't notice, and that's like $170 as
Okay.
opposed to this is close to 300.
Okay. But $170 for a high-end for a good processor is amazing these days.
Quad core.
and then there's also 3750 if you
Right.
want to stick with the i7.
Right.
And there's a K and a non-K variant for that.
So
There's-
is there a benefit of using the unlocked if you want to make a quieter machine? Can you know?
You can theoretically underclock.
Yeah.
People have done that, as a matter of fact. They underclock, they undervolt, they underclock, and so it uses less power, so you can run quieter if you want to.
Okay.
We're just going to pretty much stick to the defaults. Now, we're not going to use the default cooler.
So Intel's, and to
But I
be
need-
fair, the current crop of Intel CPUs, the coolers are pretty good.
The stock cooler's okay, yeah.
Well, the stock cooler is okay because the CPUs now, even the high-end,
It's hard to get that guy out of there.
the 3770K is rated, I think, at 75 watts.
At full load.
At full load,
Yeah.
so we're anything 83. It's certainly not 130 watts that the old Extreme Editions used to be.
Well, remember the old dual-core Pentium 4s where
yeah.
the stuff catches on
Theoretically,
fire?
130
Yeah.
watts, but really,
Yeah. Really, who knows? You have to get an extra air conditioner for your house.
now this looks like a classic ZIF socket. For those of you who may be used to older CPUs, it works a little differently. You'll notice when you lift it up, for example, this comes up this direction, not the other direction.
Oh, okay,
separately.
so it goes the same direction
in
as
fact,
the lever now.
it's kind of in fact it's kind of attached to the lever even.
That's much easier.
And there's a protector on board.
Let's talk about this because this is important.
The pins are no longer on the CPU. If you look at the bottom of the CPU, it's just these flat.
Well, it's been like that for a while now.
Yeah. So this protects the pins.
So that something doesn't bounce into it while the board's being shipped.
Right.
You need to keep this. There's a note on it that says, "Hey, keep this thing."
Right.
Because if you ever need to RMA the motherboard, you're going to have that to send it back.
You can see the pins are on the motherboard right now.
Yeah. Crazy stuff. Very dense.
And it's
lot
called
of
socket
pins.
1155 because there's 1,155 pins
Right.
in there.
Which is why a 1156 CPU would not work on this.
It's one better though, right?
No.
So there's little notches on both sides of the CPU. So
Okay.
we're going to drop this in
So
and
let's-
align the notches.
Now you can see the notches in the CPU align with the tabs in
Right.
the socket.
Also, another thing that helps
arrow.
is there's a little arrow here.
Yep.
Now, and there's a little cut here in the corner that the arrow points
Use
to.
the notches and the two notches and
Right.
the arrow.
So
and-
Lloyd, when you're putting this in, is it okay to lower it down and then kind of squiggle it around until you
Bad
get in the right
idea.
place?
Really bad idea.
Okay.
You want to try dropping it in as straight as you can.
Okay, and you don't want to take this in and out a lot. This is not
Right.
a socket that's designed for multiple
Right.
sleevings,
Right.
as it were.
And then you sort of make sure that when you put the cover down, that it lines up with this little screw that actually is part of the latching mechanism.
And this is basically one of the few places you can really screw up as you're building the machine. So it's worth taking your time. It helps to have good light, I found.
Right.
And yeah, don't hesitate to go slow.
Right.
On this socket, it looks like the way to hold it is to grab the CPU this way, because the notches for your fingers are kind of on the top and the bottom.
Right.
So
Again, let's just lift that up and show those notches one more time. See, you can see the notches there, and the tab there, and there.
and then and you can lower it like this so you can see. Then there's a place for your finger to get down on. You don't want to drop it in, but you do.
Right. In
want to
fact,
get
they
it right on.
conveniently put little cutouts in the socket, plastic of the socket, to make it easy for your fingers to go down.
This is the part where you'd be very careful. The good news is if you do screw something up here, you're going to screw up the motherboard probably and not the CPU.
Right. And usually motherboards cost more than the CPU, although some high-end ones, it's not true anymore. Now, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to pre-apply the heatsink paste.
Okay.
Just because I don't want to have to do it when it's in the case.
So if we use the stock cooler, then there's already some thermal compound on the bottom of that cooler.
Right.
So this is the stock cooler, which is you have your heatsink and.
Right. And if you are using the stock cooler, you can just mount it directly because it has some goo on it.
Like you don't want to rub this around. You don't need to touch it. Just
Right.
smack it down. Follow the instructions. Put the cooler in. It'll be fine.
Right. But in fact, we have
It's
the
over
Arctic
there
Silver
by the
5.
cooler.
Ah, good old Arctic Silver.
Now you need a very little bit of this.
A pea-size amount, Lloyd?
Everyone says pea-size amount, but you got to really see.
I think a baby pea maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. A half a pea.
The reason is, you want as little as possible because the last thing you really want to do is have the heatsink slop out over the sides and get into the pins and everything.
Well, and I mean, how much?
That is, and show how much you actually put on there.
See, and this is how much I use. We'll show you how.
That's a finger in comparison. Here's a screw. Let's give some context here.
Well, you can see the CPU socket even.
Well, I guess you can see. Yeah, there you go.
So, and then what I do is I take this little X-Acto knife.
It's just like a.
You can use a screwdriver
knife or something. Yeah.
And just sort of smear it so
I've
it's
used
very
business cards for this
thin,
before.
very even, and we're done.
How much? I mean, how big is the die underneath the? Because the thing that we're looking at here isn't actually the CPU; it's the heat spreader on top of the CPU.
That's right. The die is very small, and unlike past dies that people may have seen, it's actually rectangular, not square.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not very. I forget. It's like
the size of a fingernail or something,
270
right?
millimeters square or something like that. Not very large.
Okay, so are you going to go and put the cooler on now, or are you going to wait until we're in? Memory next. Okay.
Yes.
Now,
memory, so cheap these days.
Yes, and I chose this memory for a particular reason that turned out not to be very useful, and it's because of the motherboard. No. This memory is Kingston HyperX low voltage.
Okay.
Theoretically, it will run at 1.35 volts.
Okay.
At 1600 megahertz.
Versus
1.5.
Okay.
So it uses a little less juice. The problem is that you can't actually manually adjust the voltage on this motherboard.
So it's going to send the 1.5 no matter what.
So it runs at 1.5 just fine, but
it's not a. I mean, this is.
It wasn't as useful as I'd hoped it would be.
I have to assume most of these ITX boards aren't kind of have the overclocker friendly features.
Right.
That like voltage adjustment for the memory.
ASUS makes a pretty decent little mini ITX board that does have a lot of those features in it, but it has a disadvantage of this giant voltage regulator module section that kind of sits up vertically that you have to mess with.
Blocks the space. Okay, so when you're putting this in, there's a couple things to look at.
Right. Let me show that again. I did that too quickly. So
well,
again,
we got talking. You know, it happens.
Right. Notch, and then there's a little tab inside the socket itself.
And this is basically
Lego. I turn this around all the time. I always try to. This is why you should never force anything in, because I will inadvertently, even though I'm like dyslexic about memory modules or something, even though I thought I lined up correctly, I will have put it in the wrong way. And I realize if I don't force it in, I'll recognize right away that I'm doing the wrong thing. But if I try to force it in, I'll ruin the memory module or the socket.
Or take
both.
a chunk out of the socket. Yeah. And as memory modules change, the placement of that tab changes. So if it doesn't, if it looks like it's close but it doesn't fit, you probably bought the wrong kind of memory for your motherboard.
And this is DDR3 memory. You bought 16 gig, 2 8 gig sticks.
Right.
It's so cheap. It's a little over $100, $120.
Right.
For 16 gigs of memory.
And the 8 gig kit, that's the same equivalent of this, is about 50.
So something else to talk about. If you're building a full-size ATX board, you'll probably have 4 memory slots, or maybe even 6, depending on the board you choose.
Right.
But you should build with two slots.
Well, no.
Let's talk about memory slots and chipsets and stuff. So the chipsets that work with the Ivy Bridge processors now, generally the full-size motherboards have 4 sockets, 2 memory channels. You put them in pairs, right?
Okay. And it's important to get the memory in the right socket.
Right.
If
they're color coordinated.
They're usually color coded. And then the other thing, but if you're going for the Extreme Edition parts, the socket 2011 processors, they'll have a minimum of 4 memory sockets, all of which have to be populated. Well, they don't have to be populated, but if you want to get best performance, you typically have to put in 4 modules. Some actually have 8, in which case you get the same situation. You want to make sure you populate the right socket.
And if you have any question at all, it's worth looking at the motherboard manual.
Right.
Because some vendors, at least in the past, they're better about it now, it seems like, have said, okay, you need to have memory in these 2 orange and blue sockets and not just the blue side. So read the instructions.
Really, it's the ones
most
these
of
days
them
are same color.
Yeah, same color. I remember, I can't remember, I think it's MSI a few years
MSI
ago.
used to be really bad about it.
Alternate colors.
Now it's all same color. And if you have 4 slots,
Right.
and if you want to get 8 gigs of RAM or 16 gigs of RAM, you want to fill up 2 slots.
Right.
Because then you're using.
One thing you can do, though, is that with those 4 socket motherboards, is that the two pairs don't have to be the same, just the two modules. So you can have two 4 gig if
And
they're in the
then
right sockets, and
two
two
8
2
gigs
or
or
2 8
right.
gigs, right?
It's generally better to get as much memory as you want and use the minimum number of slots to get the channels populated.
A couple other things about this motherboard: the pins that we're going to connect the front panel connectors to, the power switch on, are color coded.
Oh, that's nice.
Very nice. And you'll notice there's different colors here for the SATA ports. The white ones are SATA 6 gigabits per second.
Okay.
The black ones are SATA 3 gigabits per second.
So are they all part of the chipset, or do you need to install drivers?
They're all
to
part of
use
the chipset.
Okay.
At
that's
least
good.
with Windows 7 and 8, you shouldn't have to worry about it.
And same thing for the USB 3 ports.
Although with Windows 7, I would definitely want to install the Intel drivers that come on the motherboard CD.
That's a good idea, just in general.
Right.
All right.
Okay, so we've
What
done.
next?
Well, next, we're going to start getting this ready for the case, I think. And the way we're going to put the motherboard in, and then we're going to start installing the cooler.
Okay.
So
Sounds
you
great.
want to get that USB header in there first?
No, well, after I get the case set up.
Okay, so let's lift the case out here.
I mean, when you're doing the cables, especially when they're attached to something that's
When
not
I-
attached to the case, you
right.
kind of want to minimize the movement that you're going to have to do.
Now let's see if I did let's see if I was right about how I wanted where the power supply thing was. And it turns out that I was right.
So this is important. Because of the tightness of the fit on the back of the power supply, you have to make sure that the power supply cable ends up on the right side.
Right, and there's the 24-pin connector. Now it turns out that the
Yeah, we should probably
4-pin
rotate
one,
this around so we're on the right side. Oh, okay.
Yeah. The 4-pin connector is there, so we're pretty good. Now there's 4. Now the nice thing about BitPhoenix is that they put all the mounting screws in ahead of time. I didn't have to do that.
Oh, in the case.
Yes.
Oh, that's nice.
Which is kind of nice.
It looks like you're a little off on the back plate. So if you look at the back plate on the,
I can't see it.
Yeah.
Ah, yes. Okay. So something is holding me up. What is that? Ah, that's great. The fan wire.
We talked about that.
Yep. There we go.
Okay. So again, you shouldn't have to force.
Right. So everything's
In
good.
theory.
You have to not use force, but you have to press it a little bit to line up. The reason I have to press a little bit is that Gigabyte and ASUS tend to pad their ATX
The back plane.
panels. So you have to push it in just a little tiny bit. It shouldn't require force, just a little gentle push.
And is that to reduce vibration or isolate vibration, I guess? Or is it just
think it's
because
just to
they
sort of
think
make
it's
it a snugger fit.
cool? Okay.
So this is where, now, here's a couple of nice features of the case. This case has a removable filter on the top.
Oh, that's nice.
And it's also nice because I can now get in with my long screwdriver.
When you could theoretically put a couple of 12-centimeter fans up here, it looks like.
Yes,
if you
you
were
can.
so inclined.
Right, you can.
So this case came with the motherboard mounts already pre-mounted.
Right. In some cases, you will find a bunch of little brass screws. That they look like screws, but they're actually nuts.
It's like a hex nut with a
Yeah,
screw
and then
hole
there's
in
a
the
screw
top.
hole in the top, and then there's a screw mount in the bottom, and you screw it into the case in the right locations. And they're typically labeled in the case for you have a micro ATX or standard ATX.
If they aren't, you can put the motherboard in the case, kind of eyeball where the holes are.
Right.
Make sure the important thing to do is to make sure you don't leave stands in the case that are hitting the bottom of the board because you can
Correct.
short things out.
Correct. Now, one thing that is true that's for people who are really old school and haven't built a PC for, say, 10 years, in the old days, you actually had to put a washer on top of that mount, a non-conducting washer,
Right.
because they didn't isolate or insulate the hole. But now that's pretty much, you don't
Yeah,
have to do
there's
that.
those little circles around the
Right,
hole on the
right.
board. Okay, so you have this. Looks like it's lined up pretty well.
Yep.
You
Four
as you said,
screws.
power supply cables coming out on the right side to hit the power supply header over here. Your SATA stuff is on the right side to plug into the
Right.
optical drive.
Right, PCI Express for the graphics card.
drive. Yeah. So I think let's.
Okay, so give me one of the fat screws.
You want a fat thread screw for this, and I'll hold one up so you can see. But it's,
Now I'm going to.
this guy.
I have actually to sort of cheated here and tried to use the electric screwdriver, and it works. But it's actually also very easy to strip the threads or get them cross-threaded.
Yeah.
So we're just going to be careful about this.
and I find.
And you want to finger tighten it anyway. You don't want to make it very
Yeah.
tight. So I just literally remove this from the electric screwdriver because it's easier than actually a big handled screwdriver. Right?
Well, in a lot of cases, I
long
mean,
bit. It's good.
the electric screwdriver is handy and good if you build a ton of PCs. If you're just building one every 2 or 3 years, a normal manual screwdriver is totally sufficient. I have some
And
more screws here.
generally, I find that longer blades are better, like this.
Oh, okay.
And you want both a number 1 and a number 2 bit.
Hold on, explain.
So the number 2
is this
bit.
some sort of filthy joke, Lloyd?
No, there's number 1, number 2 bits for Phillips heads. There's
Okay.
actually more than number 1, number 2. On PCs, though, the number 1 are the finer ones for the little smaller screws.
Okay.
And the number 2s are for most everything else.
The kind of chunkier, high torque
Right.
ones. Okay.
right. Okay, so I need another one of those.
I got 4. How many screws total on here?
4, just 4.
Wow, that's nice. Usually 6 or 8.
Yeah, we're
9.
9.
Do you ever screw all 9 in? I never screw all 9
Oh
in.
yeah.
Well, actually, a lot of motherboards now, that center one is no longer there. In the center rear. Is this right? Yeah. This is,
And I always feel like that center one is a real important one because it's the one that's going to take the pressure when you push the PCI Express cards in.
They're all corners.
Oh, see, it looks like there's something in the middle. Oh, that's the for the CPU fan mount.
is this the right screw? Oh, no.
Did I give you the wrong one?
Give me
Oh, I
the right screw.
apologize. Who's that guy? I think I'm a little low on the fat thread guys
I only need
here.
one more.
You want the square head ones?
Yeah.
Okay, here you go.
Let's- Okay, now I have not tightened all the screws yet because I wanted to make sure that, whoops, where'd it go? Here, no, got it. Because I have magnetic screwdrivers handy. Because I wanted to make sure that they all lined up properly. Then
Okay.
I'll go back and retighten everything.
It's a recurring theme.
Right.
On average, when you build a PC, how many screws do you leave orphaned in the bottom of the case, someplace you can't get to them?
I just generally turn my case upside down and shake them after I build it and they fall out.
Turns into a musical instrument.
Okay, so now our motherboard's in. A couple of things worth noting. We haven't put in the cooler yet. One of the things we want to do before we put in the cooler, and this is going to be kind of a pain in the butt, is we want to put the
USB header?
USB header in.
Okay, so make sure you have the right side of the case.
Big USB 3
Yeah.
header.
Yeah. And make sure I have the right. Here it is. This is it.
Should we rotate around so we can get on the,
That's a good point.
shot?
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Sorry, Norm.
Also, we will attach the power supply connectors too.
Okay.
But this goes in.
So this is the fiddly thing we were talking about before. It's
Yep.
it's a really stiff, chunky connector.
Right.
It's high-speed data, but I mean seriously.
Yeah. So this goes
And
in.
power.
And power, yeah.
There. This has a knot. This has a tab as well.
Yeah.
Lines up with a notch.
If you've used IDE cables in the 90s, you'll be super familiar with this.
Yeah. Same idea.
There
And
it
there.
goes.
So it just snaps into place.
And then we'll put the power connectors in.
So at this point, you want to be really careful not to yank the door away,
Right.
or else you'll potentially
So you
damage
put
that
your
connector.
power cable in now.
Yep. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come through here.
Cable
Address it.
management.
Yep.
And this is keyed as well, so it only goes one way.
Correct. I'm pulling in here and it'll allow me to actually stuff this cable down so I can close the lid later.
So there's no windows in this case. It's not about pretty cable management. It's about pretty enough cable management.
It's just about
And
making it
airflow.
easier to close up afterwards.
Yeah.
Also, there is
we should show the
I'm doing
snap
the
on
wrong
this
way.
too.
Yeah. Let's do it the correct way.
So there's a clamp on this side of the power connector.
Right.
Boy, that is a terrible way to bring that in.
Yeah, I think if I were designing this motherboard, I would have rotated the
Yeah, no kidding.
power connector 180
I bet
degrees.
that's probably part of a spec. You can tell the right way to plug this in. It'll only go in one way
Right.
because
Yeah,
of the way
snap.
the slots are keyed, but there's also
Right.
a notch on the side that the clamp goes
Right,
on.
we'll take one of these 4-pin power connectors.
Does it matter which one?
Doesn't matter.
They're both the
actually.
same?
Yep.
Okay.
And that's just for CPU power.
That's for CPU power.
And you can
This
see
was actually created so that it would deliver enough power to the Pentium 4.
and eventually there are two 8-pin ones for
Right, especially for
CPUs.
people, for high-performance CPUs, people that overclock.
1366
Right.
these
Yeah.
days.
Right.
Do we want to do SATA cables now while we're on this side, or
Are
hold
we going to
off?
do SATA cable? We don't really. Yeah, it'd probably be a little easier.
They're kind of a tough run
Yeah.
because they're on the wrong side. Since you
No,
have to
not
switch
those.
to
The
SATA
data cables.
So need 2 of those.
Yep.
So anything special on the SATA cables, or do you just use the ones that come with the motherboard usually?
There's 2 kinds. Gigabyte actually ships 2 different kinds. They ship one with a straight-in vertical header,
Okay.
right, and ship one where one end has a
A snakehead.
snakehead.
Cobra head.
And this is the one I attached to the optical drive.
Okay.
It's not as big a deal with the SSD because of the way we're going to go in. Sometimes, though, I prefer to hunt down snakeheads for all of them in some cases. But
And you can
depends
get,
on the case.
that's something you can get at Amazon or
Right.
Newegg or Fry's or wherever.
So for the SSD, I want to use, of course, the. Now here's a little philosophical thing. I of course want to use the SATA 6 gig per second interface because that's what the SSD,
the SSD,
supports.
yeah.
Now I always try to get, when I do my first install,
Mm-hmm.
I connect to the one that's furthest away and hardest to reach.
okay.
Because if I ever add a drive, I want to be able to get to the
Yeah.
one that's easiest to reach.
It makes sense.
So put that in the back.
On a case, this doesn't matter so much on this case because this is a small case, but on the case that I use at home,
Right.
I'm
actually going to do is run it.
Are you going to run it down and under? Fancy.
Yeah, try to.
Hide those cables.
I may not have.
You might be able to bring it around through there, yeah. I think you're gonna have to tuck it through. Oh, there you go. That works. I find
Is there enough room?
it's gonna be real tight.
Just barely.
You know, you might be able to move it to a
Actually,
different
there,
tray.
There it
There we
goes.
go. I'll do that.
And for the SSD. And these SATA
show
data
that.
cable connectors have the metal clip, so it kind of gives you a little snap in.
I don't know what that was.
That
but
was
it
just
this guy. And these have little clamps.
Right.
This is what you were saying, I think.
Right.
Ron.
Yes.
Yeah, the old SATA data cables didn't have latches. And so what would happen is that your cable would fall out inadvertently if you shook your case, which is kind of a problem.
I think it's this side. But
Oh, the other way.
And then you need a second
I have
SATA data.
a snakehead
Right.
one.
Do you want the snakehead for the optical?
Yep.
And that one
So
goes
then we're
here.
going to connect up to the back black one here.
Because it doesn't. Because the optical drive is not going to be 6G.
One other thing to notice is that this has a little L shape to the connector, so you got to make sure you notch it in correctly into the SATA.
Only goes in one way.
It only goes in one way.
Don't force.
You
But
can
either
force it
end.
in the wrong way. I've
Either
done
end.
that.
So, this side that you're plugging into the motherboard right now could go onto your drives.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. The SATA cables are pretty straightforward
Right.
and easy to use.
And I just, I'm stuffing this down here just to minimize the cable length eventually.
This is not. At this point, you're worried about airflow more than how pretty it looks
Right.
inside.
Okay, so there we've got most of the oh, and then lastly, but
Fan?
not equally important.
Oh,
no, we're not. We'll get to that later, actually. I'll show you how to do that. There's a trick to it, but I want to do that after I install the CPU cooler. But it's worth installing these little motherboard down connectors. There's the LEDs for power.
Okay.
There's the HD
panel
audio
audio.
connector. And finally, there's the actual power and reset.
And there's no eSATA on this, I assume, right?
No.
Okay.
No, USB 3 has pretty much killed that off.
So this is connecting the case to the motherboard
Right.
for the indicator lights, for the power button, the reset
Correct.
button, for the front panel audio. So
Right.
because there's built-in HD audio in here. So in some motherboards, there's a difference between HD audio and
AC97.
AC97.
Yeah.
But C97 is really old and
Yeah.
essentially unsupported now.
Really,
right?
the only reason they put these anymore is if you ever use a case with a really old motherboard. I don't know any MediaTek motherboards, well, maybe some early VIA ones
Yeah.
that might have had AC97, but really, you can't really trim it off. So what I often do is I'll take like a twist tie and just twist this on here.
Or a piece of electrical tape sometimes.
Right.
Okay, so the power switches are not polar. You can just plug them
Right.
in directly on the power switch. They're color coded, you said?
Yes.
How do you
So
find out what color means what?
It's in the manual, but
Okay.
I know from previous experience that the red ones is the power,
Okay,
but they are labeled on the connector, so it's nice.
that is good. What about
And the blue one is reset.
So then some other boards, Asus does a thing where they put a little block. You plug all the headers from the case into that and then just jam the block into place. That's
Right.
really convenient. The only tricky part about this is the LEDs, I find.
Right, especially when they don't label them. I mean, they don't color code them. See, this is all black.
Okay, so how do you know which one's the positive and which one's the negative?
I took a wild guess when I originally did this, and I don't recall even if I did this, if it worked, but I just put them in so that the labels were visible.
Taking
So typically the white one is the negative, right?
Right.
And you want to have the negative to the negative on the motherboard.
Right, or the one that has a different color, like an actual color, like
Yeah.
a red or green, will be the hot one.
Yeah.
Usually.
And because the LEDs only work when the power is applied in one direction,
Right.
then if it
Now,
doesn't
here's
work,
where I don't remember, Norm. Can you hand me the manual? Because I don't remember which color was the hard drive one. So the manual.
Refer to the manual.
Right. We are actually looking at the manual, and if we go here, there's a page that shows the front panel connectors.
I love
Very
motherboard
convenient.
manuals. It's like decoding.
I like the fact that they give the pinouts for the SATA ports as if I would ever build my own SATA connector. Here we go. Here's the front panel. So
Okay, so let's see this guy over here.
the HD one is the one on the. I know that the reset was on the outside, so the HD one is on the outside.
And usually, let me show this for a sec. So typically in the motherboard manual, the way that the board is labeled is they'll keep the orientation the same when they show the picture of where it is on the board. So here's the connector on the board, and that means you can assume that the pin one is the top right.
Now, actually, BitPhoenix labeled this, but it's extremely subtle. If you look on here, there's a little triangle on one of the connectors. I'm going to assume that means hot.
Why not?
Okay.
Makes perfect sense.
So-
Case
Now
manuals.
the nice thing about this is that the color coding on the pins themselves actually have a plus and minus on the
Oh, that's
base.
good. So it's like in the plastic that the metal comes up out of.
Right.
And putting these on is really straightforward. There's a piece of metal that sticks up out of the plastic. The pins, you put the sleeve down on that, and there's basically even if you do the lights backwards, the worst thing that happens is you have to go back in,
And redo
flip
it.
them around, and do it again.
Yeah, you won't burn out your LEDs or
Yeah.
anything like that.
Nothing bad happens. Again, the only places you can really do serious damage are when you're putting the CPU in. I've seen people force and push the memory too hard and break stuff there, but
Now here's where I want my light. Can you hand me my light
Yes,
there?
absolutely.
So I have one of these little clamp lights,
Yeah.
which I've used before as a clamp light, but really I just need a little flashlight for contrast.
hello.
You don't wear a light on the top of your head, like a head-mounted light.
I have one of those, but I don't want to look that dorky for the show.
Hold on. Wait. What do you mean? Explain. I use my headlamp all the time.
Yes, but do you do it on TV?
Well, we're on the internet. It's a different set of criteria.
But this actually is more useful than a headlamp because I find that a headlamp, my head is not always pointing the direction I want it to
You
point.
know, one of my favorite things for working in PCs is I have a little USB powered snake light,
Oh yes, I've seen those. Those are neat.
and you can plug it into a powered hub, even if the hub's not
I
connected.
can't remember who made it, but there's a company that made a case that had one of those built into the
Oh,
back.
I remember that. Gordon went bonkers when that came into the Max PC lab.
Okay, now let's add the HD audio connector.
Okay.
That, if I recall correctly, is way on the other side.
Looks like it's way over there.
I think that is it. It should be labeled.
And those are, you can align them because even though they're 8 holes, there's only 7 pins.
Right.
It's keyed, is what you mean. It looks like it's right beside this.
FP
It's the
audio.
CPU fan.
Yep,
Lloyd.
it is. It says FP audio.
There's also a SPDIF.
Yeah, let's show
there.
them that. So yeah, you notice that one of the holes is completely blocked off, so you can't really install it the wrong way. Or you can, but then you bend all your pins.
Yeah, bad things. Does this have an optical port on the front though? No.
No. Are you sure that's it? Yes, there we go. Which is the missing pin?
This is always a fun game.
They conveniently put a second 2-pin connector right next to it.
That's the
why I was
SPDIF connector, which nobody ever uses anymore,
Right.
in my experience.
So, do you remember what SPDIF stands for?
Serial Parallel
No.
Independent.
Sony Philips Digital Interface.
Really?
Yes.
It was part of the original CD spec, right? Yeah.
Right.
I remember on my first sound card came with a 2x CD-ROM drive.
Right.
300 kilobits per second.
Creative Labs?
Creative
Labs
Labs.
live.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're going to do the cooler. We've got all the pins in.
Okay.
Now, this is the big box.
You chose
Now,
self-contained liquid
right.
cooling system.
I'm using a sealed liquid cooling system. Some people call them a closed loop system because you never add liquid to this. It's completely integrated.
And they
never have
last
to
for a
go-
really long time.
They last for 5 to 7 years typically. This is interesting. I forgot to show one thing on the motherboard. I'll talk about in a minute with the cooler, regards to the cooler. But this is interesting because you don't have to add liquid. It's also very quiet. I'm using the Intel one, which is actually made by Asetek. And
Corsairs are also made by Asetek.
Corsair uses Asetek, and I think they also use Coolit.
Okay.
But the interesting thing about the Intel one I found is actually a little bit quieter than most of the others, even though it's the same company. I think it's probably because of the fan they use. It won't overclock as much,
Okay.
but I'm not doing that.
I mean, there's two reasons to use water cooling. One,
Right.
because you want it to overclock when you want you
Right.
need to carry more heat out. Or one, because you want it to be quiet.
Right.
You're going quiet.
Right
I
now,
approve.
the way this has has one power connector. Or
Okay.
One main power connector. Where is it? It's on the fan. Where's the fan? Oh,
Fan's
here's the
right
fan.
there.
We'll attach the fan in a second. So what you actually do is you plug, if I remember correctly, the fan gets plugged into the adapter on this, and then this
okay.
guy gets plugged into the fan
So you
header of the
daisy
motherboard.
chain.
Yes.
Basically.
Some of them require 2 motherboard down connectors, and it's kind of a pain.
Or occasionally a Molex on something
Right.
really old, right?
Right.
Okay, so this radiator is going to go up on the top, or you're going to put it on the back, or what's
It's going to go. I'm going to put it in the back.
Okay.
That's the way I had it. The clue is I actually built the system first, made sure everything was I could get everything in,
Yeah.
and then I took it apart and brought it out.
What's good to do when we're doing video.
Right.
You don't want to get
And the
three-quarters of the
direction of
done.
airflow is very important for these because you want air to be
Right.
pushing.
Intel actually allows you to do it either way. I'm going to do it the default way, which is I think it's pull.
getting air
Right.
out of the case.
But they actually
air
come with adapters allow you to turn the fan around and mount it the other way
okay.
if you want.
And so the general rule on airflow, we haven't talked about this yet, but the general rule on airflow is you want to bring cool air in the front and blow it out the back, right?
Right.
At the top. So that's why you have an intake fan in the front and in front of the hard drives,
Right.
and you're going to exhaust out the back.
Right. Some more screws
So a
here.
lot of screws.
Yep. I'm trying to remember which one was which now.
So these are this is pretty much the only moving part. I guess the optical drive counts as a moving part. There's a fan in the power supply.
Right.
There's a fan in front of the optical in front of the hard drive
Right.
or SSD. But this is pretty much it for moving
Fan
parts.
GPU.
Oh, fan on the GPU.
Right.
Yeah.
Now you notice that these came with 2 sets of screws, one slightly longer than the other. The slightly longer one is how you screw the fan into the
Into
heat
the
sink.
radiator.
Yeah.
Okay.
Radiator, excuse me. The heat sink is on the pump.
So the neat thing about these is that the two components are radiator and fan,
Right.
which you're going to hook into the case.
Right.
And then this guy right here is a pump, but it also has an integrated heat sink. And you normally think of a heat sink as a big thing with a bunch of radiator fans on
Right.
it. You don't need that because it's water flowing through and it transfers the
Now,
heat.
I
much
should
more
add
efficiently.
that these fan mounts are standard size, so if you really wanted to use your own fan, you could.
Oh, okay. If you wanted something quieter, faster, or
Right.
whatever.
In fact, Corsair sells several of their models without a fan at all, so you can put your own fan on.
Okay, I like that. I like putting my own fans and things. There's a switch on the side of this fan, Lloyd.
That's for, low, I believe, low noise or high performance.
Low noise or high noise. And the washers are,
Yeah, I tend to set mine to quiet.
yeah, I almost always set mine to quiet. I never really regret that, it turns out.
Wow, this motherboard has very few, because it's mini ITX, very few fan connectors. The 3
Has
pin
2.
has 2 of them.
Right,
Some
one for the
come with up
CPU.
to 5.
Right.
And then the CPU one is a 4-pin one
Right.
with control.
Right. So the thing is, so we have 2 fans, the one on the CPU, which is going to connect obviously to the CPU fan, and then the one in the front case. If we put a third one in this top part, we would have had to use one of those Molex
Adapters,
connectors
yeah.
or a splitter of some kind.
Well, and then when you do that, it's not a smart fan. So it's plugged into the motherboard.
Right.
The motherboard can control fan speed and
Right.
noise.
Right.
So there's downsides.
Although I should add that in the case of the fan that I put in the front, it's actually a fixed speed.
Oh, okay.
It's not actually controlled at all. This one is, though. The processor fan is controlled.
Well, the thing I found is if you're talking about like depending on the fan, of course, if you're talking about a 600 or 800 RPM fan, then it moves enough air to get
Right.
what you want done.
Right.
Without making any
I forgot to
noise.
show something on the motherboard before you install it. I'm not going to take it out now.
No.
There is, to attach the heatsink to the motherboard is this little bracket thing. Underneath the motherboard was a bracket that is mounted with actually double-sided sticky tape that Intel supplies.
And they
you with.
do that, or you have to do that before
You have to do that before you
on?
put the board
Okay.
in. If you don't do that, then obviously can't. The interesting thing is that this is adjustable so that you can put it in 1155 or
The corners are
1366.
adjustable.
Right, the corners.
Oh,
are
the
adjustable.
corners of the
Yeah,
of
you
the
can flip
mount.
these around,
Okay.
or in socket 2011.
Okay.
The thing about, and it comes with 2 different sets of screws. One screw fits socket 2011, and you don't need the bottom reactor because socket 2011 actually comes with little screw mounts built into it.
Oh, it's built into the board.
Right.
This is probably the most frustrating part of building a PC if you're using a third-party cooler. If you're
Right.
using the standard cooler, those Intel fans are
snaps
very
in.
easy. You just push the corners in and rotate.
Right.
These, you have to use that bracket, and then you have a plate in the bottom.
Now, the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to, oh sorry, Norm, you finish the thought?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to install the heatsink, or sorry, the radiator first, and then
Okay.
we'll put the heatsink
Do you want me to hold
in.
something? Do you need a hand?
I think we're going to be good.
It's so when you're putting that double sticky side tape thing on the bottom, how do you make sure it's lined? Do you have to eyeball it and make sure it's lined up? I got
No,
that.
there's actually there are. Remember the screw mounts have to go through holes in the motherboard.
Okay.
So that's how you line it
Oh,
up.
so they're posts.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Also, there is a thing you want to do it the right orientation. If you do it 90 degrees off, it might not. The sticky tape might be in the wrong place in terms of the pins underneath the motherboard.
Oh, good to know.
So one of the things I also neglected to mention is that there are no adapters in an Intel liquid cooler for AMD processors.
Right.
So if
It's hard to believe.
So if you really are using an AMD processor, which a lot of people do, you want to get one of the other coolers, Corsair, Antec, any of those companies.
Asetek.
Yeah, they'll make sealed liquid coolers you can buy retail that have adapters for both types of CPUs.
And so if you buy a retail processor, it's going to come with the cooler, and
Right.
you should be ready to go.
Right.
You can buy a white box processor that doesn't have the cooler.
Right.
But
Also,
also
I
doesn't
should
have a
note
warranty,
that
right?
certain Intel processors and certain high-end AMD processors don't come with coolers, and you actually have
Oh.
to buy an external cooler.
Okay, so then how much does the sealed cooling system cost?
This is about between $80 and $90.
Oh, that's not too bad.
And some of the ones I mentioned earlier, like the Corsair ones that don't come with a fan, are like, you can buy one for $49.
And then you add your $15,
Right.
$120.
And that's only if you're going with the liquid cooling. If you
Right.
want just a nice air cooler, you can get one for $20, $30.
Right. Let's show the. In fact, let's show the alternative that I like. This and the
It's
Silverstone
the next,
box.
next box over.
Yeah. So Silverstone makes a cooler, an aftermarket cooler, that it looks a lot like the standard Intel cooler,
Okay.
and it's the NT07. Works with socket 1156 or socket 1155. I believe they make a 775 version. I
Okay.
don't think they make a version for 1366 or 2011.
775 version. I mean,
For the old
for
Core
old, yeah.
Core i2
Okay.
Core Core 2.
Core 2,
processor,
yeah,
right,
Core 2 and
right.
Core 2 Duo and Core 2 Quad, yeah.
So anyway, this has some nice benefits. It's got a switch like the Intel cooler for quieter full performance. It's got a really nice copper, very shiny heatsink surface. This sort of curved fan, and the fan blades themselves have actually more fan blades than the Intel cooler, and so it'll spin. It'll deliver the same amount of air with less noise.
Oh, so fewer RPMs and more in there.
Very low profile.
And that's
Right.
25
Very
to
low
30
profile.
bucks?
Yep.
Great. Cooler Master, I know, makes some
Yeah, do you recommend a high profile copper air cooler?
You know, I've used them in the past. My problem is that there's some of the good ones, Thermalright and some of those others are really nice. They work well. They're just bulky and heavy, and
sometimes you have to take the motherboard off the thing to mount them and stuff like that. It's a big
And
pain.
so I just don't deal with those anymore because in fact, once they're in place, sometimes you can't work inside in the case very easily. So I generally have gone to these sealed liquid coolers for the bigger systems.
Okay.
But again, that's a preference thing, right? If you're gonna,
No.
some of those air coolers, some of the high-end ones, can actually do a very good job if you're overclocking.
Yeah, I mean, it really, for me, the difference between the closed air and the air cooler is whether you want noise or not.
Right.
And noise bothers me, and I'm happy to pay another $100 to get that.
Right.
And I totally appreciate that.
Now, mounting this is kind of entertaining because if you read the directions and look at the videos, they say screw this in, and then you sort of slide the heatsink in and rotate it a little bit.
That seems really hard to do.
That actually doesn't work because this still ends up being a little bit too low when you screw it in even a little bit.
Oh,
So I
wow.
just generally put it all in at one time.
Okay.
So, but first we're going to screw in the radiator because that
Yeah.
means I'll have
Yep.
a for mounting point. Now I'm going to think about how I want to do this because I don't want this to come around the graphics card. So let's rotate it this way.
So you touched on this, and you touched on this a little while before.
Right.
You want to make sure you think about which way you want the air to flow.
Right.
The case comes with the cooler comes with some adapters if you want to switch the fan around and
Right.
aim it the other way.
So we're just going to slide this in this way.
Does it have arrows and stuff on the fan to tell you which way the air is flowing by default?
No,
Sometimes they do.
because it tells you in the Intel manual.
Okay.
But that's remember the adapters to reverse the fan direction.
Right.
You can actually do that if you want.
And when you say adapters to reverse the fan direction, they don't reverse the way the blades turn. You literally flip the fan over.
Yes, correct. So this is oriented towards a standard 120 millimeter fan mount.
Okay.
So I need the slightly longer, no, the short screws.
The short
really
screws.
short screws.
Okay, these guys right here.
Yep.
Do you want the washers?
Yes. This is where I want washers.
I'll just give you 2 and pick the rest out.
Actually, not these short screws.
Oh, the other short screws.
Yes.
These guys?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
The slightly
Not the
coarser thread.
So these guys right here and the washers.
Again, we're not going to screw it all the way in because we're going to make sure everything's oriented properly. Just in a little bit. And
Is that right?
we'll go down to the
That's it.
lower left now.
Diagonal.
So you're doing this like you do, like you change a car tire. You
Right.
do one and then you go across, and then you do another one and rotate around a little bit
Right.
and go across.
Right.
So that you're
It's
not,
actually, actually you could do it just the top ones first. That's okay too. Don't do the
Okay.
bottom ones first.
you want to minimize kind of stress on
Right.
the system.
And
There
the
you go.
last one. With the when we screw this down into the motherboard, we definitely want to do that sort of alternate car tire version.
Okay.
Now you notice that
Yeah, that's
love
your
that.
that's your torque wrench.
minimum. There we go. That's in.
Okay, that's easy enough.
Now this part is going to be kind of hard to see, but now you notice that these are on pivots, so that you can actually orient this pretty much any way you want. I'm going to bring this in.
The
tubing.
Tubing's on pivots.
Right.
Okay.
And then I've already got the CPU thermal paste in.
A little bit of
Yes.
light.
And then, yeah, a little bit of light would be helpful.
You know, try to get it from over here if you want. Normal.
Whoops.
You're basically, what you're doing right now, describe for people watching, is you're mounting the...
Actually, we can show this kind of like this. Can you see this at all? So we're mounting the bracket on top of the cooler. The bracket goes in from the top, so that you can't bring it in from the bottom or the tubing gets in the way. See?
Oh, okay, so the tubing comes right out the bottom of the side.
Right.
And the brackets, the idea of the bracket is just to give enough force that it holds the
Correct.
cooler on the CPU well.
Correct.
This is a kind of a situation where you have to kind of do it by feel.
And you want to make sure there are little tabs that you line up, otherwise the bracket thing
This seems
the
like
bracket.
a bad design on this bracket. I don't want to.
There are
judge.
the other ways I've seen it. That they have like a 4 screw hole thing, a plate that mounts on it. There's no good way. This seems to work fairly well. The other way it does, and it all depends on what you get used to.
I mean, I guess the trade-off is that this is something you can use on another motherboard maybe later.
Yeah.
If you upgrade.
Now
to a
this is
different
where I
socket.
want. Give me the long handle screwdriver because I can go in through here
Okay.
and screw this down.
So what you're doing, you're just lining that up with those posts that we talked about before that are attached to the two-sided tape
Right.
on the bottom
Am I
of the
not quite lined up yet?
Not lined up.
Yeah.
Close. Close.
And on this, you're just going to literally just start the threading and then move on to the other one, I assume.
Yep. Oh, I see. This is protecting. There we go.
And if you're looking at this and you're nervous, if you're just using a normal stock cooler, it's much simpler.
Yeah, you just push these tabs down and they latch into place.
Yeah, it's like little
you right
plastic. Yeah, we
Yeah,
can show.
so if you look over here, these 4 corners, they're not even screws.
Yeah, they're snaps basically.
These 4 snaps, push it in on top of the cooler, and
And then you push those pistons down.
these you just put like a flathead screwdriver in,
You only do that when you remove it.
push that in. That's it.
Sometimes you have to reach in a screwdriver because of the
Yeah.
case, not because your hands won't go in.
Yeah.
Um,
But by default, you just push it. You line it up and push it in,
Right.
and you're good to go.
now you got to make sure you hear that snap because if you don't hear the snap or feel it,
Yeah.
it means that it's not properly seated and your CPU will overheat.
And the first time you try to move the case, probably you'll end up bopping your CPU cooler around inside the machine. So how's it going in there, Lloyd?
I have to listen this up again. I was too enthusiastic. One of the reasons I'm not using my spiffy electric screwdriver, first of all, it's a little too bulky to get in here. Secondly, I'd have to do it kind of an angle, and so that would be very easy to cross-thread things, so I'm trying not to do that. There we go. Now let's see if I can get this. And if you actually, if you have enough room in a case, like on some of my bigger cases, I just use my fingers. They work
Yeah.
fine.
I mean, it has big thumb screws, right?
Right.
I find that having a couple, I mean, I have a lot of adjustable screwdrivers. Having a nice set of long neck screwdrivers is almost always useful.
Yep.
I mean, the only time you need them is when you really, really need
There
them
we
and
go. Now,
the hardware store is closed.
my favorite story about screwdrivers is that I was at a Orchard Supply with my brother-in-law, and we were returning something. I don't remember what we were returning. We were standing in line at the return counter behind this guy who had bought an electric screwdriver, and he was showing it to the clerk, and he says, "It only turns the wrong direction."
Oops.
Which means that he probably shouldn't have been allowed to have an electric screwdriver anyway,
Wow,
since
yeah,
he didn't
they-
realize that there are 2 ways to turn it.
Maybe he shouldn't have had a screwdriver, period. He needed the left-handed screwdriver, I think. Okay, so it looks like are you worried about clearance with the hoses on the side of the GPU?
No, because it's, no, actually not.
Okay. We'll swing it around so people can see in a second.
Because remember, the GPU will be flat, and the projection will come out this direction.
Oh, okay, away
the
from the CPU.
Side of the case.
Oh, so it actually is going to hang off the side of the motherboard.
Kinda.
It's weird.
Yeah,
It's
because
mini ITX business.
Right,
I don't know,
right.
Lloyd.
That's actually right. It hangs off the side of the motherboard.
Just riding the motherboard.
Again, the key is you want the screws down so that they become firm. You don't want to like over tighten them.
So an eighth of a turn past hand tight.
Yep.
I feel like this is
Zero
the Blair Witch.
wobble on the cooler over the CPU.
Yeah.
Right.
This is the Blair Witch project of CPU installs right now.
Well, this is the most terrifying part.
Even with an air cooler, it's
Yeah.
still like you're.
I mean,
I hope I'm
you're
doing this
talking
right.
about the most precious
Right.
part of your build.
Right. Do you remember the original Pentium 4 coolers that had this clamp thing?
Oh, it
and
was
then you were saying,
terrible.
it's like you're saying, how much force do I need to clamp this down?
down.
And
It's
it
insane.
always made you always felt like you were making a horrible cracking
Okay.
noise right before it
Now, a
snapped
couple
into place.
points. You notice that I wanted to show you this. I could have installed this front panel fan before I installed the cooler, but I'm going to show you a little trick
Okay.
with this.
Are you going to show? I think you're just going to tell us probably if I had to
Well,
guess.
first I want to install. No, I'm going to show it to you because I
Okay.
have to connect it. Okay, now we got this,
Okay.
First, let's finish up the Intel cooler.
Okay, so you're going to plug the fan into the pump,
Right.
and then the pump into the
Right. So where's the
motherboard.
fan? There it is. So the fan goes into the adapter here.
And when you're doing this, how careful do you have to be to knock loose the hoses? I mean, it
Oh,
looks
the
like
hoses are actually pretty robust. They're actually
Okay.
connected quite well. I've known people who have twisted them around so they leak out, and that's a kind of a problem. But I've never had that problem. But I'm somewhat careful.
Just be careful.
Yeah.
Okay.
How much liquid do you is in that?
Probably only a couple ounces.
Yeah, it's very, very little.
Still, you don't want to all over your motherboard, especially if it's running.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I used to fool around with regular liquid cooling where you actually fill the reservoirs.
I
and
did
that
that.
always terrified me.
You could get the stuff that was theoretically non-conductive, but it was only non-conductive until it hit skin oil, basically.
Right. Okay, the CPU cooler is down here, so that just goes in.
So you're plugging into the fan connector, fan header on
Right.
the motherboard now.
Now the other fan header is over here. I did this on purpose because I wanted to show people what they did if they get stuck. So there's the fan header right there. I can't get my fingers in there, right?
No, that's impossible.
So I have this.
Are you going to forceps something?
Yep, I'm going to take this little fan cable.
So where can you get forceps, Lloyd?
Hospital.
CVS?
Really?
Yeah, right, really. Actually, you can order these from Amazon. I think this is where I got
That'll
these.
buy your Cheerios and your forceps.
That's right.
CVS.
Yeah. I like having a dental mirror sometimes when I'm working inside a PC. I find it gives you a good angle into places
don't
you
get
can't
it
necessarily
reversed?
see.
That totally screws up my orientation.
Well, then
in
you
terms
just
of
need to
what's
get
left
two
and right.
dental mirrors and hold them apart so you get, kind of.
And then someone else to hold their light,
Yeah.
and yeah.
No, you need one of
It's an
those little
operation.
spy cam things, on the
I've always wanted one of those.
on the end of a stock.
Yeah.
There you go.
Why would, everybody should have those at this point, I think.
Well, I'm sure they're not expensive anymore.
Yeah, last time I looked, it was still a few $100.
Really?
Yeah,
It's just a webcam on a stock.
Yeah, but you want something that's decent resolution so you can actually see stuff.
Okay. Anyway, so I just want to show that if you did this, and you say, "Oh my God, how do I get that fan header?" and you're not lost, you just need the right tool.
So let's. We can clamp off some arteries and stuff now too. So we have that going for us.
So Savannah just had surgery.
Hey, I've got holes. Let's do this.
At this point, are you going to put, there are very few components left, one
Right.
major component left. You're going
Yep.
to put the power for your drives in.
Yep, that's the last thing to do actually before we do the power for the
So
graphics.
earlier-
Let's flip this whole thing around so we can see.
Yep.
With the motherboard, put in
Can you grab that door?
connector
Thanks.
to your one SATA, or your four SATA.
Yep.
The
So-
data cables are
Yeah,
connected.
there's plenty of length here, right? So we're going to do the first one down below.
Do you want to run it through so you can shut the door?
That's a good point. Thank you.
And at this point, this side of the case could actually close up.
Yeah, we're going to close that side of the case up actually, but I want to show how you line up the cables. It's kind of a pain in the butt.
Because the thing about the SATA cables is they're directional too. They only go in one way.
Yeah, the power cables are also L-shaped, kind of like the data cables.
And in my experience,
Thank
they're
you.
always the wrong way.
Right.
So like if you have two drives that are directly above each other, the cables will be reversed. So you have to do some weird twisting.
So this one actually goes in the
You
direction.
don't, I don't twist horizontal. I wrote flip
Yeah, you flip.
up.
This went in the direction I wanted
Well, that
it
was
to. Isn't
easy.
it awesome?
Yeah.
And then we'll just run this guy up here. I think I can come in from above. If I want to minimize cable clutter, actually I don't need to. Never mind.
I don't think they use these kind of hemostats anymore. I think they have something. I think they have something a little
More high-tech?
A little more high tech.
Looks cool.
There we go. We're
It
done.
does look cool.
All right, so you have power to your SSD, power to your optical,
Right.
power to the CPU on the motherboard.
Right. Next thing we're going to do is power to the graphics card.
Well, the graphics card, which between CPU and the graphics card are the two things that are going to determine your performance.
Right. Let's talk about a couple. Let's go with I have here a GeForce Titan,
Oh my
GTX Titan.
goodness.
This is
my
720
goodness.
million transistors. 730
It's
million
a
transistors.
$1,000
Lot
video
of-
card,
lot of-
Lloyd.
Yes, I know. I did this.
Can I touch it?
Yes.
Unapologetically, yes, I know.
I'm putting this high-end graphics card in here to prove it can be done more than anything else.
Yeah.
Because we've got a small case, a fairly small motherboard,
And this is
a
about-
660 watt power supply, and it's going to drive this graphics
The
card.
fastest graphics card you can buy, basically.
Fastest-
That's
So
a
that's a
single,
single
GPU
GPU
graphics card. It's 11 inches.
Right.
And you can put it, it's
Right.
amazing that on a Mini ITX case, you can
Yeah.
put an 11 or 12 inch
Yeah.
graphics card.
Yeah,
That's
this
what-
will actually
yeah,
take
right.
one of those. I believe it'll even take a 6990, which is ridiculous.
Wow. I'm going to take the screws off for the mount up here.
Now, of course,
Or
we don't expect everyone
No.
to
You
be
don't have
to do
buying
that.
the
Yes, you
NVIDIA GeForce Titan.
Mm-hmm.
If you're buying a graphics card, you can get something modern from either AMD or NVIDIA
Right.
at between
Well,
$200 and $300 for a
Right.
mid-range
In
card.
fact, if you when we have the article that goes with this,
Yeah.
I list an option that's just a little over $1,000
For
the whole
entire-
build.
for the whole build, not for the graphics card.
Yeah.
And let's show you the key things about that. One is the power supply is a little cheaper, but it's not that much cheaper. But the really important things are, if you hand me the graphics card and the hard drive. Right? So this is an Asus Radeon HD 7870,
Okay.
right? So it's about $235, $40, I
Yeah.
think.
And it's the equivalent on the NVIDIA side, about a 660, GeForce 660.
So this is
Right.
their
Non-TI.
Not TI.
Yeah, right.
Is this their fastest single GPU card or
No,
one down?
No, it's a couple down.
Couple
actually.
down now, okay.
This is sort of their mid-range card.
Okay.
But if you're running a 1080p monitor, which most people are these days,
Yeah.
and you're
Which
willing
means
to
plugging it into an HDTV.
right,
even.
and you're willing to limit yourself to like 2x AA or no AA, this should run most games pretty well.
Okay. And that's $200. So, I mean, we've even done things in the past where you could
Right.
go down to $500-$600 and have something that'll play, everything but the PC exclusive titles like Metro and original Crisis and stuff like that. It really
And
high frame
if
rates.
you're willing to run Metro in high versus ultra mode,
Yeah.
you can still get pretty good frame rates out of
Okay.
that.
Especially at resolution.
Right, and then
With the Titan, NVIDIA made very limited quantities of
Right.
those. And same with the
well,
690.
we should get a little history. The Titan is really, the chip in here was designed to do compute tasks, not for
Supercomputers.
Yeah, for supercomputers, not for parallel compute tasks, not for actual graphics.
Oh,
it's
no, you're taking
of
off
doing
the plastic.
Wow.
Oh, that's the best part.
And anyway, so
cards
but
smell.
since it is a GPU as well, parallel processor, they decided to make a few of them that would actually do graphics.
For high-end
high-end
enthusiasts.
And you
Yeah.
can triple SLI this.
Right.
Not in
but
this system,
What
but-
was interesting about this is that I talked to a couple of people, including Falcon Northwest, who makes high-end computers. They make this little tiny box called a Tiki. It's much smaller. It's like half the width of this, about the same height. And they put a GTX 680 in there originally, in the high-end version.
grief.
They couldn't put the dual GPU 690, not because it was too long, but because of the way the airflow happened.
Okay.
But they can put a Titan in that. So you can get this thing that's half this width, very quiet, runs one of these if you want to pay the money. Let's show the hard. We'll show the hard drive too.
Yeah, so if you wanted to go with hard drive, I don't know where you
Should
have
be-
that. In here. The other way to get to a $1,000 PC is
Right.
to not use an SSD.
Not using SSD. This is about $110 now. I think hard drive prices have come down a lot.
Yeah.
1 terabyte, 7200 RPM, 64 meg of cache.
And this is the black edition.
This is the black edition. It's pretty speedy, fairly reliable. I have several PCs running this drive. It's a really nice drive.
If you don't want to go SSD and you just want to use a standard hard drive, get the black instead of the green.
Right.
It seems like we're pretty much done.
Right.
Very
just
close.
the graphics card.
Just the graphics card.
Yep.
Right.
So
Titan.
it's a little tiny case and a great big graphics card.
Right.
Is there a trick, or is it just
Well,
go
you want to
in?
install the power cables first.
Okay.
Again, there's a theme here.
Yeah.
And this one's actually an 8-pin and a 6-pin.
Right. It's actually, this is, at idle, this thing doesn't use a lot of power. And NVIDIA claims, and I have nothing, because of the way they're powering this thing, that it's a 250 watt card.
Max.
270 watt, maybe
So you
270.
get 75 watts off of the PCI
Right.
Express slot, and then 75 off of
225.
225 off of those two combined. Yeah.
Right. So again, these are keyed, right?
So so they're keyed, and you have to do the 2 and the 3. Can you plug you can plug the 2 in first, and then plug the 3, but it won't work the 6. It won't work the other way, right?
I generally just line them up and stick them all.
There's a
at once.
little notch. I really hate, this is one of my least favorite things.
Yeah, there's a few power supplies that actually now come with an actual 8-pin option, which I really like because enough graphics cards have them.
Yeah, well, or alternately, you can get a cable. They'll do a cable that you plug a 6-pin into the 8-pin, and
Right.
then, yeah, it's more cables, but it's a better solution.
There you
I
go.
think.
So there's our power. Oop, I
Oops.
screwed up.
Oh, so you got to route the cable
I gotta do it
through. So because right now the door won't close.
Right. So we want to route the cable up through here.
Okay.
They do, for such a small case,
You
it
could
does
do the
have
side, too.
really decent.
you wanna
Yeah,
get
nice
crazy.
little rails and
That's all right. And then we'll come out.
Okay, so now we're going to do that whole thing again. We talked a little about the multi-rail power supplies a long time ago now.
Right.
There's not really, at this point, you really don't have to worry about it. You do want to plug these in on different cables, or does it even matter?
Doesn't with single rail power supplies, it doesn't really matter.
Okay.
So yeah, you shouldn't have to worry about it. Most good power supplies from companies that make good power supplies, Cooler Master, Corsair, Seasonic certainly, who makes a lot of the power supplies for some of these other companies, all deliver enough current and are robust enough, et cetera, et cetera. So
and if you're using a mid-range video card,
Right.
it's most likely going to be one. one 8-pin.
Maybe 2 6-pins, but yeah, certainly not.
Okay, so this card uses 2 slots on the back, so you want to make sure that they line up.
Right.
And then are you just kind of eyeballing it, or just oh that was easy.
Wow, that was fast.
Then,
Is there a latch that holds this in place on the
yes,
slot?
there is. If you look on the slot here, it's hard to see. You probably can't
Rotate
see
and
what
tilt probably.
There's because it's the same color. It's black. Some of them they color code in blue. There's a little latch here. You push this down. You pull this down when you want to remove the card.
Okay.
Right.
And it's nice because you can actually get to that since it's on the edge of the board.
Right.
I really like how it's just kind of hovering on the side.
Yep.
Yeah, it's
hangs
kinda
off
cool.
the edge.
You need a window there.
Really
Lloyd.
cool profile.
So now we need to screw it in.
Yes.
Obviously.
So you need 2
Screwdriver.
screws.
Yep, I got. Now this is another one of these little gotchas that I found with many small form factor cases.
Okay.
Because they want you to have a certain amount of adjustability because some of these cards are tall and stuff like that. They always have these weird adapter plates.
Oh, it's because otherwise you might not be able to wedge the board in.
Right.
Okay.
So
One extra little thing.
yeah.
One more thing to worry about.
Right. So,
And that goes up behind the back plane of the
Right.
case. So you're doing that into the video card first, and then you'll screw that into the case.
correct.
And you want to get both.
Of course, I have to line up probably. There we go.
Lloyd, you're obviously, your home system, you have 3 monitors.
Right.
So you're going to use 3 outputs.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of video cards these days come with, at least 1 DVI, also HDMI and DisplayPort.
Right.
Which port, if their monitor supports all 3 of them, which one would you recommend they use?
Which one well, it depends on if you're hooking up just one monitor.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah. I mean, it really doesn't matter, especially if it's under 2540 by 1440.
Right.
When you start to get to the point where you're at dual link DVI,
Yeah.
you want to make sure that the card, and all modern cards do, but maybe if an older card, HDMI 1.4 for the bandwidth. If it has DisplayPort, you have no problems if the monitor has DisplayPort. DisplayPort 1.2 is coming out this year. The cards support it. Monitors with DisplayPort 1.2 are coming out this year.
Okay.
And you do cool things like there'll be actually 2 DisplayPort connectors in the monitor, and you attach one cable from the graphics card to the first monitor, and then you daisy chain them.
Oh wow. Okay, so it's almost like Thunderbolt, but for
Yeah,
DisplayPort.
right.
I mean, some of the older display. If you have an old DisplayPort monitor, sometimes there's compatibility problems. I
Right,
found.
right.
But for the most
Yes,
part,
and in fact, I found with NVIDIA cards in particular,
Yeah.
with an older DisplayPort monitor, when the system goes to sleep and the monitor goes to sleep, it sometimes doesn't wake up, and you actually have to turn the monitor on and off.
yeah, I've had that problem before.
Guys, it's done almost.
Yes. Well, we want to.
All the components
We're
are
going to
in.
put the back panel on. This
the
one.
door
back
on.
panel. Now,
Spin
my
it around,
superstition tells me I'm not going to completely reassemble it till I know it works.
Now,
Yes. So let's put
and
that
there's
side
no
on.
there's no reason for that
Let's
other
put
than
the
the fact
top
that
on. It's just tradition.
just tradition.
well, the thing is, if it's always easier to just take it back apart. To fix something if it's already still open.
Right.
That's the reason you do that.
Right.
This is where having a small case where the cable's kind of packed in.
Right.
you know,
I have
kinda
found
squish
though
them
that
a
when
little bit.
yes. Okay. Okay. I'm sure it's a statistical thing, but most of the time when I assemble a CC and then turn it on, it doesn't work.
And that happens. I mean, just to be clear, that happens to everybody.
Right.
Thumb screws.
Yep, thumb
the
screws.
back.
Looks like you might be off a little bit on the bottom over there.
Possible. No, actually, what it is.
Does this, or is it just cable bolt? Oh, there you go. Sometimes if you're doing, if it's not really on this case, but sometimes cases will have little guides that step into rails on the bottom and top edges.
Right, which is kind of nice.
And
this one does actually. It has
it does.
it has a latching thing on the front that
Oh,
you
okay.
slide it into. And one more of those.
There.
Now you could have put the radiator in the top almost. It looks like.
I probably could have, yeah. But again, remember we're also facilitating airflow through the case.
Right.
so.
So then you would have.
Also, I have this bad habit. I don't know about you, but I put stuff on top of my PC.
Oh, of course.
Blocking the
If
fan
you have
is
a
probably not
cat,
a great
the
idea.
cat loves sitting on top of the PC if there's an exhaust
Don't
fan
put a
up there.
soda on there and have condensation.
No, you
drip
put that in
down.
the cup holder, Norm.
cup holder on your PC.
Yeah, the cup holder's in the
PC
front.
cup
You just
holder.
push that button, it comes out. You
Okay.
put the cup there.
Now we need to boot.
Yeah.
Okay,
Wow.
so-
So we're gonna get a monitor.
Yeah.
We're gonna go plug in the keyboard.
Yeah.
And mouse, and we're gonna boot this up and maybe run a benchmark and
Why
see
not?
how this performs
Right.
because you have basically Intel's best.
Actually, we're going to just
processor.
first see if it posts.
See if it posts. Okay, don't get ahead of ourselves.
Baby
Right.
steps.
Baby
yeah,
steps.
it looks really really nice.
Okay. I didn't bring up. Did I bring? Is there a power cable inside the power supply box?
I'm sure there is.
We have power cable.
We need to go get monitors and stuff. We'll be right back.
Right.
Okay, monitor connected. There's a mouse and keyboard hidden back here.
Right.
Can I hit the red button?
We
You
have
may
not powered it on. Just
No, this
just
is
let's-
this is
First
no,
time.
we're doing. Let's do it live.
Yes. Okay.
I'm gonna hit the button.
Hit the button.
The blue light turned on. The hard
Lights
drive
on the
light
video
flashed.
card.
You know, why do you need a hard drive light in a world of SSDs?
Good question. Oh, look.
It
I
booted.
just saw something. Oh,
There we
hey,
are.
there
Look.
we go.
And we are in. You can see the CPU frequency, which should say something like 39 something, I think.
There's a 9 and some zeros there, I'm
Yep,
pretty sure.
Yep, that's single core performance. It's
Yep.
normally running it through. So yeah, we are live. Let's just save this off and go.
So this is going to be a UEFI bias, right?
Yeah,
On
yeah.
on
Actually, you can
anything
control it
new,
with a
right?
mouse. See?
Oh, wow, mouse?
There you go.
This is the future. I really need to build a new computer.
Oh, let's see if we have. Let's escape out of here. So we saw the processor. Did we have 16 gig of memory? I couldn't tell. Let's say.
16 total memory size. Yeah, 1630.
Okay, now let's see what it looks like when we go. Now, I want to tell the truth here about something else. Before I came here, Windows was installed on this SSD.
So you bought an SSD with Windows pre-installed.
I
They
wish I
sell
could.
these days.
Like I said, I built the system before to make sure all the components work.
Of course. I mean, we always do that when we do a build.
Right. And Windows is installed, so we're not going to make people sit through the exercise of us setting up Windows.
However, you have to say with the USB 3 drive that has Windows 8 on it,
Right.
and installing to a fast SSD,
Right.
installing Windows takes like 8-9 minutes now for
Right.
Windows 7. I
It
haven't
is much
installed
faster,
Windows 8 in a
but
long
yeah.
time, but
Yeah.
You have pre-installed. You have some software installed, so we're actually see how this runs running on a 30-inch 2560 by 1600 monitor.
I didn't realize that the GeForce GTX on the top of that card lights up.
One
I
of the
don't know if
reasons.
Sam can get down there and show
Nice
us,
card.
but it's
I'm going to use this
pretty
opportunity
cool.
also to let people know that we're giving away a video card. ASUS has donated a GeForce 680. So
GTX 680.
GTX 680, which is a pretty good card.
This is a 4 gig model, isn't it?
This I think
It
a
is,
4
yep,
gig
it
model.
is, yep.
it says
Yep.
4 gigabytes right there in the front.
And if you want to win this card, whether you're watching on YouTube or on Tested, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Tested.com,
Yes.
like this video, post a comment. That's how we're going to select someone. Post a comment on Tested or on YouTube with whatever your computer system specs are, and we'll pick someone by the end of the month.
Random drawing. Random.
So
Shell-
booted. You're in Windows 8.
Yeah.
Yep, we're in Windows 8. Let's run 3D Mark.
It's still Windows 8, huh?
It's still Windows 8. I don't need to run Steam. Well, I don't have any. I may not run Far Cry because I don't have an internet connection.
Oh, right, Uplay. So apologies, we have to lean over, and we're watching the monitor on a monitor, so it's a little confusing here. Something's launching.
And so 3D Mark, their benchmarking system, you wouldn't use this to compare to just because a game runs 3D Mark well doesn't mean it's going to run, or a video card runs 3D Mark well doesn't mean it's going to run all your games well.
Right.
It's a point of comparison between video cards.
It's a synthetic benchmark.
Right. But it's a pretty one.
It is pretty. So this is on a 30-inch panel. It's 25 running 25.
Yeah, it's not running at
16.
2560.
Oh, it's not. Okay.
It's running in whatever. I can't remember if I have it set for extreme or normal mode, but it's some lower resolution that they set automatically.
Okay. But the desktop was running at 2560 by 1600, wasn't it?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
hard to
Windows
tell from
Windows
here.
7 and Windows 8 does a really good job of detecting what the monitor does and setting its default
Mm-hmm.
desktop resolution for whatever that is.
There we go. Wow, I haven't seen this benchmark before. It's nice.
I have seen so many loops of 3D Mark at this point in my life that I'm cool. I'm good on that.
This only takes about 3 minutes to run.
That's nice.
All right, so if you're watching this video also not untested, we have an accompanying story that you've written about how you pick this parts
Right.
and some recommendations for some other parts. We have a couple different PC build guides. Nathan Edwards did one
Right.
a month and a half ago on the site as well. So it really depends on what you want to build your system for. Like you started off saying your goals were mini ITX, light, and quiet. So
Yeah.
it's running the game right now.
Yeah, I
on the
can't hear
benchmark,
it.
and I can't hear the fan ramp up.
And the
that's
door's
part of
off, so-
And the door's off also.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. I mean, there's no clicking from the hard drive.
Mm-hmm.
The fan isn't ramping up.
Nope.
That's you achieve the goals you wanted to.
Right.
If you put your ear right next to it, you can hear a fan. I'm a little disappointed, but I think this will do. This is fantastic.
and you feel the air off it's coming off the GPU. It's kind of warm.
It'll get warm.
Yeah.
A bunch of different price ranges. So the total cost on this is going to be, I would assume, well over $2,000.
As we built it today, it's a $2,500 system,
Okay.
roughly. If you just replace the GTX Titan
A
with
more reasonable video card.
with a 680 even, right? 680, you're going to cut that in half. So we're talking a $2,000 system.
Right.
If you go down to a standard hard drive and a few other things, you can get down to like close to $1,600.
Or like we said, the small SSDs at this point
Right.
are very inexpensive.
Right. And then if you go down to like that hard drive / Radeon HD 7870 system we're talking about, that's just a little over $1,000.
And it's with the same case and,
Right.
and all.
Right.
So I mean, you can build, and if you want to scrimp on some other stuff, you can get well under $700, $600,
Right.
and have a very capable 1080p gaming machine. So I guess, I mean, is there anything else we want to cover before we go, or?
That's it. You'll find more PC guides on Tested. You can follow all of us on Twitter.
Yeah.
At Will Smith, at Lloyd Case, and Chan.
1L for Lloyd.
1L for Lloyd. That's right. Thanks, thanks Lloyd, for coming and building
sure thing.
This
building
has
your
been great.
PC
Right.
with us.
We'll talk more about this. We'll have to have you on the podcast when this video goes up. So check out the podcast that week. We'll talk a little bit more about it. And for Tested, I'm Will.
I'm Norm. See you guys.
And I'm Lloyd.
See you guys later.